Chapter 504. P.S. Something cropped up. I'll update 2 more chapters on Monday. Zhang Yan stayed in Beichen sect for more than 10 days. He refined the star's sword pill again, and then paid a visit to the sect master Jiang Lin and several elders of the sect. Then, he said that he was going to leave. Beichen sect only had one Yuanying cultivator, Elder Yan. Zhang Yan's cultivation was similar to his, so he wanted to invite him to stay for a few more days and exchange some insights on cultivation. But seeing that he had already made up his mind, he felt that it was a pity, but he couldn't ask him to stay any longer. On that day, Zhang Yan said goodbye to everyone and returned to the sect. He also knew that the Donghua continent was not the same as before. All the sects were on high alert, afraid of causing any misunderstandings. So, he didn't release the dragon carp. Instead, he used the sword pill and flew like a rainbow, speeding towards the clear nether heavenly lake. Now that he was traveling at the speed of light, in just 2 hours, he could see the towering shadow of Zhaoyu Mountain that was hidden in the misty clouds. A moment later, he saw 3 traveling lights wandering back and forth in front of the mountain, and there were faint sounds of laughter coming from them. Zhang Yan looked over and saw a young girl at the front. She was about 12 or 13 years old. Her hair was combed into a double conch, and she wore a short long skirt. She looked innocent and lively, slender and beautiful. She was stepping on a cloud shuttle, but she wasn't used to flying in the air. After a few feet, she started to wobble. On her right was a young man who hadn't even reached the age of a crown. His eyes were black and white, and he was full of intelligence. Under his feet was a cloud that looked like white cotton. The two were fighting, each trying to be the first, as if they were competing. Not far away stood a young cultivator with a full forehead, a strong body, and an extraordinary appearance. An ochre light surrounded him, and he looked at the two with a smile. Zhang Yan originally didn't pay much attention to it. Ever since the clear nether heavenly lake became his abode, there had been quite a few junior disciples from his sect who came here to travel. But when he saw this person, he felt that this person's face was vaguely familiar, as if he had seen him somewhere before. With another thought, he remembered and thought to himself, this should be the disciple that fellow Taoist Luo snatched back from the spring diagram tribe in the past. He once heard from Luo Shao that this person's father was a human while his mother was a demon. She was the beloved concubine of Demon King Quan He, Zhao Shi. Thus, he took his mother's surname and took the name Zhao Chong. Zhang Yan looked at the boy and girl below and guessed, could these two be fellow Taoist Luo's new disciples? He thought for a moment, then retracted the surging stellar energy in his body and pressed down on the cloud. At first, the young man and the young girl were running side by side, but after a while, the young man fell behind by half a body length. Seeing that the young girl was about to pass him, he rolled his eyes and suddenly let out an "ah-ya." He stood on the cloud with one foot and took a step in the air with the other. At the same time, his hands grabbed wildly as if he was about to fall down. When the young girl saw this, she immediately exclaimed and wanted to help him without thinking. Who knew that the young man chuckled and urged the light cloud under his feet, instantly overtaking her by 30 to 40 feet. In front of a mountain rock, he stretched out his hand and plucked a stalk of green grass in his hand. He raised it up and shook it, "Junior sister, this time you've lost. The phoenix tail immortal pheasant that Lady Jing gave you belongs to me." The young girl was so angry that her pretty face turned red. She stomped her feet and shouted, "Senior brother, you're cheating. This time doesn't count." The young man said lazily, "Junior sister, you can't blame senior brother for this. Every time you fall for it, if you go outside and meet those disciples of the demon sect, you probably won't even know if you get sold." The young girl was unconvinced and said, "That's just because of senior brother. Outside the mountain gate, definitely won't fall for it. In short, this time doesn't count." The young man's face was full of helplessness. He turned to the young cultivator in the distance and said, "Uncle Master Zhao, you be the judge." However, Zhao Chong just shook his head and didn't say anything. At this moment, an eerie sword light suddenly came from the sky. His expression suddenly changed, and he blocked the two of them behind him. He said loudly, "I wonder which Taoist from the sect has arrived." Although the disciples of the demon sect wreaked havoc in Donghua, thanks to Huoxian's method, the scattered sects and small sects protected the four sides of the Qinsang school. There were even Yuanying elders who came out to patrol, so very few disciples of the demon sect entered the territory of the mountain gate. Even if some slipped through, those with high cultivation were killed at any time, and those with low cultivation were only given to the disciples of the sect to practice. Near the heavenly lake of bright darkness was the important place of the mountain gate of the Qinsang school. In the past 20 to 30 years, there were very few external enemies. Those who could come here were mostly cultivators of the sect. However, Zhao Chong didn't dare to be careless. As he spoke, he had already sent a spiritual light into the heavenly lake of bright darkness. After Zhang Yan landed in front of the three of them, he withdrew the sword light and walked out. He stood with his hands behind his back and said gently, "Are you Zhao Chong?" Zhao Chong didn't feel confused. He cupped his fists and said, "Yes, I am." "How do you know my lowly name?" Zhang Yan said with a smile, "I saw you once when you were young, but you don't remember." When Zhao Chong was carried back to the house by Luo Shao, he did see Zhang Yan once. However, he was young and hadn't cultivated, so his memory of Zhang Yan's appearance was already a little fuzzy. Although Zhang Yan knew his name, he was a steady person and didn't dare to believe it easily. He only said cautiously, "This lowly one has already sent a message. If you are an old friend of the house, please wait for a moment. Senior Sister Lu will be here soon." As soon as he finished speaking, a mist that was as white as frost and snow flew out from the heavenly lake of bright darkness. The young man and the young girl were both excited and said, "Master is here." Zhang Yan looked over and saw Lu Yan walking out of the mist. Her hair was tied up with a silver ring, and she wore a deep robe with water and cloud-embroidered sleeves and a willow-green silk sash around her waist. She didn't pay attention to the two disciples and went straight to Zhang Yan. She took a breath and suppressed the pleasant surprise in her heart. She slowly knelt on the cloud and said, "Disciple welcomes Master back to the house." After saying that, she respectfully kowtowed. Seeing their master kneel, the young man and the young girl were also shocked. Only now did they know who was standing in front of them. They both knelt and kowtowed together and said, "Grand Disciple greets Grandmaster." Zhao Chong was startled and then said in shock, "So the house master has returned. Please forgive this lowly one for being blind." He also hurriedly kowtowed. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "No need to stand on ceremony, all of you may rise." The four of them stood up according to his words. Zhang Yan's gaze looked down and carefully checked Lu Yan's cultivation. Seeing that the spiritual energy all over her body was smooth and flawless, he knew that she had already broken through the most difficult barrier, the shell. She was already a second-level core transformation cultivator. If her cultivation went a little deeper, she could try to condense her mana and true seal. He unconsciously nodded to himself. He was really satisfied with this eldest disciple of his. He then pointed behind her and said, "Yan Yi, are those two your disciples?" Lu Yan bowed her head and said, "Master, please forgive disciple for overstepping the rules. Because of the rules of the house, after the core transformation, one must choose disciples from the 9 cities. But without master's permission, disciple dare not make the decision on her own. Therefore, I can only temporarily accept the two of them as registered disciples." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and casually asked for their names. Only then did he know that the young man was called Zhuahanzhang. He was originally a descendant of the founding duke of the Great Wei dynasty, Zhuo Gongchang. Because one of his ancestors was a disciple of the Qinsang school, he brought his clan members to live in the 9 cities. Because of that, he also had the opportunity to live in the 9 cities. The young girl was called Lin Xixue. Although she did not come from a big family, no one knew from which generation she had lived in the 9 cities. When Zhuahanzhang and Lin Xixue heard Zhang Yan and Lu Yanyi talking about them, they both bowed their heads and stood still. They did not even dare to breathe loudly. They had heard of Grandmaster Zhang Yan's fame since they were young. There was even a rumor in the house that among the top 10 disciples, other than the 3 who had already achieved nascent soul, no one else was a match for him. However, ever since they entered the house, they had never seen this Grandmaster. They felt it was a pity. At this moment, they were stealing glances at him. After Zhang Yan asked about their background, he did not say anything more. He smiled and said, "Follow me back to the house." He waved his sleeve and the door of the formation moved. The few of them felt their vision blur. When they opened their eyes again, they found themselves standing in the main hall. Zhang Yan looked around and saw that the house was a little deserted. He did not find it strange. In the past, when he returned to the house, it was either Luo Xiao or Shang Shang who came out to welcome him. Lu Yenny explained, "Teacher, recently Shang Nyangzi and a few of her clansmen have reached a critical juncture in their cultivation. They need someone to protect them. She could not do it alone, so Uncle Luo went to help. I'm afraid it will take some time before she can come out of seclusion." Zhang Yan said, "Then Yenny, you need to remember not to disturb them. It will not be too late to meet them after they come out of seclusion." Lu Yenny responded softly. She bent her knees again and said, "Teacher, please wait for disciple to summon the junior brothers and sisters." She moved to the steps of the hall, picked up the chime hammer, and lightly knocked on the jade chime. Immediately, a clear and pleasant sound spread throughout the cave. In just a short while, the 2 sides of the formation doors suddenly turned, and several streaks of light landed on the hall in an instant. When the light faded, Tian Kun, the Wang sisters, Jiang Zheng, Wei Zihong, and the other disciples all appeared. Seeing Zhang Yan, their expressions were filled with joy. They all knelt down and kowtowed, saying, "Disciple greets teacher." Zhang Yan glanced over at his disciples, his gaze sweeping across them one by one. After more than 30 years, although Tian Kun and the Wang sisters' cultivations were not as high as Lu Yenny's, they had both steadily entered the mystic light realm. However, although Tian Kun's cultivation seemed slow, he had the cultivation technique that Guo Zongyao had arranged for him, so he did not need to worry about him the least. As for the Wang sisters, their minds still needed to be sharpened, so it was not a bad thing for their cultivation to be slow. His gaze lingered on Jiang Zheng for a while. He smiled faintly and moved over to the last handsome youth. There was a vertical mark on this youth's forehead, and there was an old white-furred ape on his shoulder. It was his 6th disciple, Wei Zihong. When Zhang Yan left, this disciple was already more than 20 years old. At that time, he had already reached the middle stages of the light qi realm, and now he was at the 3rd level of the mystic light realm. Lu Yenny said from the side, "Teacher, 6th junior martial brother's talent is outstanding, and his heart is firm in pursuing the Tao. He only went out to find herbs 2 years ago, and he can already condense them into a pill." In terms of talent, Lu Yenny and Wei Zihong were the highest among his disciples, so it was within his expectations that they would improve like this. Zhang Yan said happily, "Very good. Yenny, protect your junior martial brother in a few days and help him condense his pill." Although Lu Yenny's eyes were slightly surprised, she agreed without hesitation, "This disciple will obey teacher's orders." As Zhang Yan's cultivation improved, he no longer had to do everything himself. If he passed down any techniques, it would be passed down by Lu Yenny, the eldest disciple, on behalf of Zhang Yan. Other than Zhang Yan's 6 disciples, there were 2 people standing behind them. They were Elder Zhu's disciples, Wen Ziyuan and Yuan Yanhui. These 2 people's talent wasn't bad. Back in the Mystic Light Realm's disciple competition, they were only ranked behind Lu Yenny. Elder Zhu had painstakingly asked for their techniques, and they had also reported to Zhang Yan that they went out to find herbs. Now, they were both at the core transformation realm. There were also 5 spiritual disciples behind them, and Zhang Yan didn't know if Elder Zhu's reincarnation was among them. However, after reincarnating, the memories of the previous generation would disappear, and they couldn't be counted as the original person. Thus, he only glanced at them briefly before passing them over. The bell was rung to summon the disciples in the mansion, but among these people, Zhang Yan didn't see Lu Mainyang and Jing Miaojuan, so he asked, Yenny, are White Sky Demon King and Junhua Demon King in the cave? Lu Yenny sighed softly, Teacher, Demon King Jing died half a year ago because she couldn't enter the Yuanying realm. Demon King Lu sent her spirit to be reincarnated. Chapter 505. The death of Monster King Junyu also affected a few of Zhang Yan's disciples, especially Wang Keiding. Since she'd stepped onto the path of cultivation, she'd never felt a sense of urgency. However, when she saw a core formation cultivator who had lived for more than 600 years die because he couldn't break through, she felt like she could see her own path ahead of her, and she felt a sense of loss. If one couldn't live forever, no matter how strong one's cultivation was, it was just an illusion. They would die like a withered tree and a withered flower. After this incident, she also curbed her usual playful nature. In the past 6 months, she had spent most of her time seriously cultivating. After Zhang Yan saw the cultivation of the disciples, he felt gratified. He summoned them one by one to test them and gave them a few pointers. After half an hour, he ordered them to leave, leaving only Jiang Zheng behind. Jiang Zheng was slightly nervous and didn't know why his master wanted him to stay. He was originally an in-name disciple and was brought back by Zhang Yan from outside the mountain. He knew that he couldn't compare to 1,000 other disciples, so he worked very hard. However, after he was officially taken in by Zhang Yan, he had only reached the second mystic light realm after so many years. On the other hand, Wei Zihong, who entered later than him, had already reached the stage of condensing pills. The difference between the two was like heaven and earth. Even the Wang sisters, although they had reached the mystic light realm later than him, had already surpassed him and were already burning their meridians. Wang Keiding had even teased him and said that if he continued to cultivate so slowly, even her 2 martial nephews would be able to cultivate faster than him. Wei Zihong had a good relationship with others. He was humble and courteous, and knew when to advance and retreat. There were many in the sect who looked down on him. Zhang Yan saw that he seemed to be uneasy, so he smiled and said, Disciple, don't panic. I asked you to stay because I have something good to tell you. He then explained the cause and effect of the incident with Pengyuan sect in detail. In the end, he said, Disciple, I won't hide it from you. Before coming here, Elder Mu has already given you the Cosmic Fire 6 Imperial Righteousness technique. He is only waiting for you to nod your head and he will bestow this technique to you. If this matter succeeds, it will not be without benefits for you. If you are unwilling, that's fine too. Wei Zihong listened carefully and found that his teacher's words did not have any intention of forcing him. It was obvious that he was letting him choose for himself. If this matter was placed on the disciples of other sects, they would probably be overjoyed and eagerly agree to it. However, he was a disciple of Qinsang school, and his teacher was one of the top 10 disciples in the school. He did not lack high-tier martial arts. Moreover, Clear Serenity Celestial Lake was a paradise, and other sects could not compare to it. It was just a scroll of a Dao technique that could not be cultivated, so it did not have much weight to him. Jiang Zheng had spent half of his cultivation years in the mortal world. Although he had an extremely good temper, he was shrewd and his way of thinking was different from others. He did not think about the matter of cultivation. The first thing he thought about was, I am cultivating in the sect, but in terms of cultivation and aptitude, I am far inferior to other sections. It is obvious that staying here will not be able to share Master's burden. However, if I go to Pengyuan sect, I will definitely be able to rope in another ally for my Clear Serenity Celestial Lake, and I will be able to repay Master's kindness in imparting the Tao. These thoughts turned in his mind for a while, and then he said resolutely, Master, disciple is willing to go to Pengyuan sect. Zhang Yan stared into his eyes and said, Have you thought it through? Jiang Zheng said seriously, Disciple will not go back on his word. Zhang Yan smiled and gently waved his sleeve. A shiny jade scroll flew out and landed in front of Jiang Zheng. This is the Stellar Fire 6 Imperial Righteousness. This is a secret scroll of other sects, and Master will not look at it. You should carefully ponder the crux of it yourself. Jiang Zheng reached out to take it and put it into his pouch. He took a step back and cupped his fists. Disciple understands. However, before leaving the sect, there are some things that I do not understand about cultivation, and I still have to ask Master. Zhang Yan smiled and nodded. This disciple of Jiang Zheng was indeed different from others. There were many things that did not need to be said clearly, and he could understand tacitly. Although his aptitude for cultivation was slightly lacking, on the path of cultivation, a firm and unwavering Tao heart was more important. In the future, he might be able to seek immortality. He stood up, waved his sleeve, and stepped through the formation door, returning to the small pot mirror. A black-clothed scholar hurriedly came out and bowed to him. This lowly one is Zhang Jing, welcome master back. Zhang Yan walked in front of him and sat on the jade couch. He then said, but I have something for you to do. Mirror spirit hurriedly bowed and said, Master, please instruct me. Zhang Yan shook his sleeve, and a gust of strong wind flew out. In an instant, spiritual light scattered everywhere, and brilliant colors appeared. For a moment, there were dozens of magic treasures floating in the air, floating up and down. If there were disciples of the sect here, they would definitely be dazzled. With his 5 directions 5 elements Taishian true light, he traveled between Zhongzhou state and Donghai state. Not to mention those who turned into elixir of Shuangguang, there were more than 10 Yuanying cultivators who died in his hands. He obtained a lot of magic weapons. Except for those that needed to be used, he did not have the time to check the rest one by one, so he took them out. He said, carefully check these magic weapons and put them away carefully. Put them together with the original magic weapons in the mansion. They will be useful in the future. This time, he did not intend to distribute these magic weapons to his disciples. He wanted to keep them for a long time. Although there were still less than 20 disciples in the mansion, but after a few hundred years, they would be like Duda and Shaoling, and there would be more than 100 of them. With the magic weapons in the mansion, no matter how big the mansion was, it would not be able to afford it. Therefore, there was a need to set a rule in advance. Only those who made contributions to the mansion could be given the magic weapons just now. When Lu Yeni was cultivating, Zhang Yan was out searching for medicine. Thus, the magical weapons she had were not obtained from her own master. Instead, they were exchanged from the merit and virtue courtyard when she went out to kill demons and earn merits for the sect. The hardships involved were not known to outsiders. Therefore, Zhang Yan decided that if the disciples in the mansion wanted magic weapons in the future, they would have to follow this rule. Now that the devil's tribulation had started, there was no need to worry about not having a chance. Zhang Jing, I have been away from the mansion for a long time. Tell me the details of the mansion. Zhang Jing nodded. Before Zhang Yan left, he asked him to keep an eye on the Qinsang school. He did not dare to forget. Now that he was asked, he told him everything he knew in detail. After listening, Zhang Yan suddenly realized that there was one thing that Feng Ming had missed out on. Luo Qingyu actually defeated Zhuang Bufan in the competition. Just now, there was news that he had achieved Yuanying. This was enough to prove that it was not a lie that only the 3 of them were going to the sword competition assembly. Zhang Yan thought to himself that if people like Zhuang Bufan and Duda had the full support of the Grotto Heaven, it was not impossible for them to achieve Yuanying. However, no matter if it was the big clans or the disciples, they had already been selected. Therefore, they could only give up this opportunity. Other than these 3 people, even if he achieved Yuanying, he would definitely be stopped by the 3 forces if he wanted to go to the sword competition assembly of the 16 sects. If it was anyone else, faced with such a situation, they would have been discouraged and run away. They would no longer have the will to fight. But Zhang Yan was different. As soon as he heard the news, he was keenly aware that there was actually a glimmer of hope. It all depended on whether his judgment was right or not. He closed his eyes and pondered for a moment. Suddenly, he said, Zhang Jing, if there are people looking for me, don't stop them. The mirror spirit quickly agreed. With that, Zhang Yan gathered his thoughts, closed his eyes, and entered a meditative state. This time, he returned to the mansion in a very low-key manner. Not many people knew about it. After a few days, the news slowly spread and attracted many people to come to visit. If they were familiar with him, he would personally welcome them and invite them in to drink and discuss Tao. Other than that, he would sit in his mansion and study the 5 elements escape technique. He did not go out and seemed to have given up the idea of going to the sword competition assembly. At this moment, the surface of the small pot mirror suddenly flashed and there was a ripple like water. Zhang Yan opened his eyes and saw a Taoist nun coming from Zhaoyu Mountain. She was bowing to the mansion. His heart moved. He recognized that this woman was a disciple of the guarding palace. He pondered for a moment and said, "Zhang Jing, let her in." After a while, Zhang Jing came in with a letter in his hands and said, "Master, the Taoist nun only left this letter and left." Zhang Yan reached out and took the letter. He glanced at it and found that it was the letter in Peng Zhen's hands. He opened the letter and read it carefully. The letter only talked about the daily affairs of the sect. The wording was polite, but between the lines, it was implicitly advising him not to think about the sword competition assembly anymore. It seemed that the right path for him to take now was to stay in the manor. Peng Zhen didn't have any evil intentions in this letter. She just subtly pointed out that the situation was irreversible. No matter how he fought, the outcome would be hard to change. He just needed to endure it. Considering her previous relationship, no one would make things difficult for him. After reading it, Zhang Yan smiled and threw the letter to the side. Why did he need her to tell him what to do? When the time came, there was another person in front of the Zhaoyu Heavenly Pond. This time, it was a disciple who was very polite. He said that he came from Mount 10 Peaks and was sent by Hu Xian to deliver a letter. When the letter was brought into the mansion, Zhang Yan opened it and saw that the handwriting was elegant. It didn't look like it was written by a man, but it was indeed signed with Hu Xian's seal. In the letter, he was invited to attend a banquet at Huanyu River in a month's time to receive the 3 elders and their disciples from Pingdu sect. The sword competition of the 16 sects was about to begin. The few sects that were close to Qinsang School started to interact more. Their disciples could also use this chance to exchange pointers with one another and fight with the sword. Pingdu sect was one of the 10 sections. Because it was located in the southwest, they rarely interacted with other sections. However, Qin Yuzhen's mother was an elder of this sect, so the relationship between the 2 sects was really deep. Zhang Yan looked at the table in his hands. Although the 2 letters were written one after the other, when they were read together, one could sense that there was something unusual about them. He suddenly smiled and thought to himself, I originally wanted to wait for another year and make a move after the sect competition. I didn't think that the opportunity would send itself to me. Chapter 506. The disciples of Pingdu sect must have wanted to use the Huan River banquet to show off their abilities and test the abilities of the top 10 disciples of Qinsang School. Sparring was unavoidable. However, none of the people who came to visit Zhang Yan at the clear nether heavenly lake had a higher cultivation than him. Thus, they didn't see that he was already a Yuanyin cultivator. Zhang Yan thought that the sect probably still thought that he was still in the core transformation realm. Otherwise, the invitation might not have been sent. He thought for a moment, smiled, and put away the invitation. The assembly was set to be 3 months later, so there was no need to think too much about it now. There were still 5 years until the sword battle. Zhang Yan thought that he could use the remaining time to improve his 5 elements escape technique by another level. Ever since he fought with a 3rd-level nascent soul cultivator, he especially attached importance to this divine ability. Every time he practiced it, he felt that there were many inconceivable changes within it. If he was able to further familiarize himself with this divine ability before the Dharma assembly, then he would surely be able to obtain another technique to rely on. Previously, with the help of the remnant jade, he had already learned a water element escape technique. It was quite effective in escaping in times of danger. However, this divine art could not only use the 5 elements to escape, but it could also trap people and block enemies. Thus, he decided to focus on this path in his future cultivation. He sat on the couch and pondered. At this moment, Zhang Jing turned around and said, "Master, Jiang Zheng is outside and wishes to see you." Zhang Yan said, "Order him to enter the hall to meet me." After a while, Jiang Zheng looked straight into the hall. He lifted his robe and knelt down. He kowtowed and said, "Disciple Jiang Zheng greets Master." This was where Zhang Yan usually cultivated. Ever since he entered the sect, he had never set foot here. Even the Wang sisters had only come once or twice. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "Stand up and talk." Jiang Zheng bowed again and stood up steadily. He cupped his fists and said, "Disciple came here to bid farewell to Master. I will leave for Pingyuan sect now." Zhang Yan looked at him and asked curiously, "Why are you in such a hurry to leave?" In his previous words, he had hinted that although it was not convenient for him to look at the cultivation methods of the Pingyuan sect, some of the key points of Dao techniques were the same. If Jiang Zheng encountered it while practicing, he could ask him for advice. This was a rare opportunity. One had to know that he also wanted to cultivate Dao techniques before the sword competition of the 16 sections. He was no longer able to take care of his disciples, so he had long set a rule that in these 5 years, other than Lu Yenyi and Jiang Zheng, he could often come and ask for guidance. The rest of the disciples were not allowed to come and see him unless they were summoned. From Zhang Yan's point of view, it would be best if he could teach Jiang Zheng for a year and a half. It would be best if he could reach the 3rd level of the mystic light realm before going to Pingyuan sect. However, he never thought that only half a month had passed. This disciple was in a hurry to leave. Jiang Zheng bowed and said, "Master, please allow me to report. I don't know why, but I've made rapid progress in this technique. I've already touched the threshold of breaking through. I just feel that I have to sense something in order to pass this stage. It should be related to the star-shocking sky palace that Master mentioned, so I want to go to Pingyuan sect to search for fortune." He had heard that there was almost no one in the Pingyuan sect who had successfully cultivated this technique. He had originally thought that this technique was extremely difficult to obtain and was already prepared to endure hardships. However, who would have thought that this technique seemed to be fated with him and was extremely compatible with him? He had only cultivated it for 10 days. After cultivating for just 10 days, his cultivation increased by leaps and bounds and he was about to enter the 3rd level of the mystic light realm. However, at this moment, he sensed that something was missing, so he stopped. After thinking about it, he decided to see Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan thought about it. His eyes lit up and he thought to himself, "Is it because of that reason? This is my disciple's good fortune. This is also his lucky chance." He smiled and said, "I approve of this. After you go back and pack up, you can go down the mountain tomorrow." After receiving permission, Jiang Zheng didn't show any joy. His expression was normal as he bowed and said, "Thank you, Master." Zhang Yan pondered for a moment and said, "After you entered my sect, you have been extremely diligent in your cultivation, but I have never given you a magic treasure. The few fellow disciples who entered before you all have magic treasures. This is too unfair to you. This time, when you go to Pingyuan sect, you can't be too shabby. I will give you a magic treasure to protect yourself." He turned his head and said to Zhang Jing, "Go and bring the star-catching exquisite bag over." Zhang Jing left with his life. In just a moment, he came out with an unassuming grey bag and handed it to Jiang Zheng. This was the treasure that the Sha spiritual master of the Xian sect carried with him. The bag could hold thousands of liters of sand and was a Xian artifact. To Zhang Yan, although this treasure was good, if he met those who were good at escaping, they would be able to escape just now. It would be very hard for him to do anything in a battle. If the 7 spiritual masters of the Xian sect hadn't surrounded him and the Sky Cauldron treasure hadn't appeared yet, this item wouldn't have been able to touch him at all. However, Jiang Zheng was only at the mystic light realm, so it was enough for him to protect himself. Previously, when Jiang Zheng sparred with his fellow sect members, he had never won a single round. It wasn't that his Fa Li wasn't enough, it was that he was restrained by the talisman every single time. Although he had always laughed it off, it wasn't necessarily true that he didn't feel depressed. This time, he finally got his own treasure. After taking it, he quickly knelt down and said gratefully, "Thank you, teacher, for giving me this treasure." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and flicked his finger. A talisman flashing with a golden light flew over and entered Jiang Zheng's forehead. He said, "This is the meridian burning technique of my Zhaoyu Palace. With your talent, it won't be hard for you to clear the 26 meridian points. You need to remember, you can't teach this technique to outsiders." This meridian burning technique was derived by Zhang Yan from the broken jade. Even in the Xian sects, it was one of the top meridian burning techniques. If the big families got it, it would make the foundation of the mystic light realm disciples even stronger. Jiang Zheng's expression became solemn and he said solemnly, "Don't worry, teacher. Disciple won't leak anything. If I break this oath, I will be punished by the heavens." Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and shouted, "Disciple, go." Jiang Zheng took a few steps back and kowtowed a few times. Then, he left the hall and walked out of the palace. Not long after, he saw a beautiful woman wearing a moon-white Taoist robe slowly walking over. He recognized it as his eldest senior sister, Lu Yenny. In the sect, other than Zhang Yan, he respected this eldest senior sister the most. He quickly cupped his fists and said, "Eldest senior sister, this little brother greets you." Lu Yenny smiled and said, "Fifth junior brother just came out from teacher's place." Jiang Zheng nodded and sighed. "Yes, this little brother is going to Pingyuan sect now. I originally wanted to say goodbye to eldest senior sister and the other fellow disciples." Lu Yenny was slightly surprised. Her beautiful eyes moved. After thinking for a moment, she took out an item from her pouch and handed it to him. She said, "I heard that Dan Hui is a figure that only appears once in 100 years in Pingyuan sect. Not long ago, her core reached the 3rd grade. She must still be trying to break through the shell. Junior brother, you might as well bring this with you." Jiang Zheng saw that the item was 3 feet long and was faintly discernible in his hand. It was like a ball of soft smoke that could float away at any time. With a slight sense, he knew that it was not a magic treasure used for battle formations. He couldn't help but ask in surprise, "May I know what this is?" Lu Yenny explained, "This item is called Mist Susha. It was a treasure that martial Uncle Hu gave to teacher to break through the shell. Later on, teacher gave it to me. Now that I've long passed this door, I'll give it to junior brother." Jiang Zheng said awkwardly, "This." Lu Yenny pursed her lips and smiled. Since junior brother wants to become Dao companions with fellow Daoist Dan and also wants to cultivate her cultivation technique, you should treat her better. Don't decline this gift. Just treat it as a gift from me to fellow Daoist Dan." Jiang Zheng didn't say anything else and bowed deeply to Lu Yenny. How could he not understand that this eldest senior sister was specially taking care of him? After all, this trip to Pingyuan sect was different from the clear nether heavenly lake. That was in other people's territory. Even his nominal Dao companion, Dan Huizhen, had never met him before. Although no one would dare to bully him because of Zhang Yan's reputation, when imparting techniques, they might not be sincere. And if he took this treasure and Dan Huizhen could break through the shell because of it, then Pingyuan sect would definitely owe him a favor. The path of cultivation would also be much smoother. Jiang Zheng and Lu Yenny spoke a few more words before saying goodbye. He went to the Wang sisters and Tian Kuan's place to say goodbye. He turned around and went to junior brother Wei Zihong's place. He stepped inside and saw a pear tree floating with light on the left. A white-haired old ape climbed on a branch and bowed to him. He chuckled and walked around. He saw a unique courtyard that occupied a few acres. 2 incomparably handsome white-feathered immortal cranes guarded the door. He said, "Is junior brother here?" A pleasantly surprised voice came from inside, "Is 5th senior brother here?" A while later, Wei Zihong walked out quickly and said happily, "5th senior brother, haven't you been cultivating Dao techniques these few days? Why do you have the time to come here?" When Jiang Zheng entered the clear nether heavenly lake, he already had mystic light realm cultivation and was very familiar with the ways of the world. Not long later, he became familiar with the people of the same sect. When Wei Zihong entered the sect, he was only 7 or 8 years old. He was still a child. Other than a white-haired ape, there was also a sick old mother beside him. Back then, Jiang Zheng had personally sent his old mother to live in the 9 cities and often came to take care of him. If Wei Zihong had any questions about cultivation, he would often come to ask Jiang Zheng. Thus, the two of them were very close. Although Wei Zihong's cultivation was now above Jiang Zheng's, he still treated him like before. Jiang Zheng told him the reason for his visit and said emotionally, "Tomorrow, I will go down the mountain. I don't know when I will be able to see junior brother and the others again." After the East Hua continent's demonic calamity, after going to Pingyuan sect to become Dao companions with Dan Huizhen, he definitely wouldn't be able to move around. Moreover, he had a bit of pride in his chest and decided that he wouldn't go back until he condensed the golden core in his stomach. Wei Zihong stared blankly for a moment, then winked and said, "Little brother has forgotten, Xixiang is a man with a family. I don't know if sister-in-law is beautiful or not. If she isn't, Xixiang can't mistreat himself. I heard that senior sister Mei under Ning Shibua is quite interested in Xixiang. If we can't get married here, we can find another when we return." Jiang Zheng knew that he had a bad temper. He shook his head and said seriously, "Junior brother, what nonsense are you talking about? It's fine if you say this in front of me, but you can't say it outside. Uncle Master Ning is very strict with his disciples. It won't be good if you implicate senior sister Mei." Wei Zihong patted his chest and said, "Don't worry, senior brother. How can I not do that? Senior brother, when you go to Pingyuan sect to cultivate, you can't weaken the prestige of the clear nether heavenly lake. If they dare to bully you, tell me. I will definitely teach them a lesson." Chapter 507. Qinsang School, Yangyue Island, Huayin Peak. Huang Fuzhou was dressed in a gray Taoist robe. His expression was indifferent as he walked slowly to the main hall. He glanced to the side and saw a Taoist in a green robe sitting at a table. He was about 30 years old and did not look impressive. However, his eyes seemed to be coated with a layer of glaze, smooth and shiny like porcelain. He had a thick beard above his lips and a broad forehead. He did not wear a crown, and there was a squinting brown leopard lying beside him. Sitting opposite the Taoist was perfected Qin's disciple, Yulongshan. Seeing Huang Fuzhou come out, she waved at him and said with a smile, "Senior brother Huang, let me introduce you. This is Pingda's sect's Wu Hansheng, senior brother Wu. Speaking of which, he can be considered a distant relative of your madam." Wu Hansheng shook his sleeves and stood up. He bowed to Huang Fuzhou and said, "I've long heard of Qinsang's twin geniuses. I finally get to see senior brother Huang's face today." Huang Fuzhou returned the greeting indifferently and said calmly, "The reputation I had in the past is long gone. There's no need to mention it." Although Wu Hanqing looked polite, there was no lack of arrogance in his demeanor. If it was before, Huang Fuzhou would definitely think of a way to suppress him. But now, his edge had been polished and he no longer had that competitive spirit. He was already indifferent to everything. He also knew that it was impossible for him to become one of the top 10 disciples. Joining Immortal Qin's sect was better than being an ordinary disciple. At least his fellow disciples on Yangyue Island would be able to take care of him. Wu Hanqing stared at him for a while as if judging if he was sincere. He said, "Senior brother Huang's state of mind is indifferent. I'm impressed." Huang Fuzhou did not reply. He walked straight to the main seat and sat down with his sleeves spread. Wu Hanqing smiled playfully and sat down once again. Huang Fuzhou said expressionlessly, "I heard from my wife that senior brother Wu is the disciple of Pingda's sect's elder Hua. This time, you're also going to the sword competition assembly. I wonder if elder Wu has arrived. Don't make me lose my manners." Just as Yu Longshan was about to speak, Wu Hanqing spoke first. "Master met an old friend on the way and was asked to refine a treasure. It might take a few days, but since I've already made an appointment with Immortal Qin, I sent this little brother here to pay a visit in order to avoid missing the appointment. Yu Longshan interrupted, Senior Marshal Brother Huang. Master has been refining a cauldron of pills these past few days and has no time to leave. She told you to find a way to entertain Senior Marshal Brother Wu. Wu Hanqing cupped his hands. He said, I've troubled you, Senior Marshal Brother. Back then, Immortal Qin owed the Pingdu sect many favors. The reason why she could be so detached from the Qinsang school was not only because of her own cultivation base, but also because she had the support of the Wu family. As for Wu Hanqing, his cultivation had already reached the threshold of breaking through. He was only a step away from becoming a nascent soul. This time, he came to Qinsang school to seek Immortal Qin's help to break through. He also wanted to see the methods of the disciples of Qinsang school. Huang Fuzhou nodded slightly. He said, Senior Marshal Brother Huang, you don't have to be so polite. Since it's Immortal Qin's care, why don't you stay on my pleasure island for a few days first? In the future, I'll call a few good friends and fellow Taoists to accompany Senior Marshal Brother to see the scenery of my Qinsang school's mountains and rivers. Wu Hanqing smiled and said, That's great. It's boring to sit in the residence. I wonder if Senior Marshal Brother and Senior Marshal Brother Zhong are friends? I'd like to get to know him. Huang Fuzhou smiled faintly and said, I'll have to disappoint Senior Marshal Brother Huang. Senior Marshal Brother Zhong is now a Yuanying Jinren. It's only a few years before the sword battle. He's currently cultivating in the glittering grotto heaven. I'm afraid I can't ask for his help. Wu Hanqing felt that there was a sting in his words. He felt a little uncomfortable and looked at Huang Fuzhou. He couldn't help but chuckle. Seeing this, Yu Longshan quickly coughed and tried to smooth things over. Senior Marshal Brother Wu, don't be anxious. 3 months later, it's the Huan River Banquet. Senior Marshal Brother Zhong will be one of the top 10 disciples. When the time comes, he'll definitely go. Why are you afraid that you won't be able to meet him? Wu Hanqing's spirit was lifted and he said, That's good. I was just about to admire Senior Marshal Brother Zhong. I heard that Jinren Qin took Senior Marshal Brother Zhong as his disciple. Because he was cultivating a technique, he couldn't go. Otherwise, he would definitely have a place in the sword battle of the 16 sections. Huang Fuzhou nodded and said, That's right. Actually, he vaguely knew that the so-called cultivation technique was just a lie. That time, Zhong Muqing could have gone. However, for some reason, Jinren Qin stopped him from going. In the end, he missed a chance. Otherwise, his ranking in the sect might have been higher than Huxian's. Wu Hanqing pointed at the table and said casually, Senior Marshal Brother Huang, I wonder which Senior Marshal brothers from your sect are going to the Dharma Assembly. Will Jinren Qi be going? When he mentioned the 3 words, Qi Jinren, although he pretended to be indifferent, his eyes clearly showed some nervousness. Huang Fuzhou shook his head lightly and said, Senior Marshal Brother Qi already left his position 70 years ago. He's no longer one of the top 10 disciples. Now, he's cultivating in the mystical water palace and rarely shows himself. He won't be going to the Dharma Assembly this time. Wu Hanqing's expression relaxed. He picked up the wine cup on the table and took a sip. His words didn't match his heart and he said, What a pity, what a pity. In the last sword battle of the 16 sects, because Qinsang school was in the midst of an intense fight for the position of the sect master, many disciples of the master and disciple lineage either died in vain or committed suicide. And before that vicious person left, because he hated the intervention of the aristocratic families, causing him to fail in the fight for the position of sect master, he actually killed many disciples of the 5 aristocratic families in a fit of rage. In the end, the huge Qinsang school had no disciples who could be of use when the time came for the competition. In the end, only Qi Yuntian went alone. Fortunately, Qi Yuntian did not disappoint. During the sword competition assembly, he relied on the number 1 divine ability of the Yinsang sect, the dragon coiling great thunder seal, and after fighting against more than 10 people, he was still able to fight evenly with Qing Qinzi of the Shaoqing sect. After that battle, Qi Yuntian's name spread all over the world. Although he knew that Qinsang School's power was greatly reduced after the internal strife, no one dared to underestimate him. No matter how arrogant Wu Hanqing was, he couldn't even think of going against such a powerful figure. After hearing that Qi Yuntian was not participating in the Dharma assembly this time, he felt that his chances of winning were much higher. He thought to himself, I think that Qing Chenzi won't be coming for the Dharma assembly this time. Then, we'll have two less strong opponents. My Pingdu sect doesn't expect to win first place, but there's still hope for us to enter the top 5 in Xianmen. He put down the wine cup and asked again, I've been cultivating in the mountains for a long time. I'd like to ask senior brother Huang. Apart from senior brother Zhong, who else will be participating in the Dharma assembly this time? Huang Fuzhou felt that the matter had been settled and there was nothing to hide. Moreover, the Pingdu sect was considered to be on good terms with Qinsang School, so it should not be a problem to reveal some information. He said, Senior brother Huo will definitely be participating in the sword battle this time. Wu Hanqing nodded and said, Zhenren Huo's Xian skill is great and he's the top 10 disciple of your sect. I heard that he's a great cultivator who is proficient in 2 techniques. I'd like to learn from him. At this moment, Yu Longshan said, there's one more person. It's senior brother Luo Qingyu. Wu Hanqing was not familiar with Luo Qingyu. He tried to probe the origins of Luo Qingyu's technique, but Huang Fuzhou was vague about it. Wu Hanqing could not tell if Huang Fuzhou really did not know or was deliberately evading. Wu Hanqing cursed in his heart. After thinking for a while, he suddenly asked, I've heard that there's a person in your sect called Zhang Yan who has cultivated to the first-class gold grade. There are also rumors that he has entered the Yuanying state. Will he be going to the Dharma assembly this time? When the disciples of the Pingdu sect heard that Zhang Yan had achieved the first-class gold grade, they were shocked and full of dissatisfaction. Many of them thought that if they could defeat this person in the Dharma assembly, they would definitely win a lot of reputation for their sect. Wu Hanqing had vaguely heard that this Zhang Yan seemed to be extremely powerful. However, for some reason, the rumors were both true and false, and there were also some that sounded extremely exaggerated. When all of them were put together, it became even more difficult to distinguish the truth from the falsehood. This made Wu Hanqing doubtful. Previously, Yu Longshan wanted to please Zhenren Qin, but she failed to capture Lu Yenny. Instead, she lost face and was finally reprimanded by Zhenren Qin. She started to hate Zhang Yan as well. She sneered and said, Zhang Yan has only entered Dao for less than 100 years. Do you believe that he has cultivated to the Yuanying state? Wu Hanqing thought about it seriously and suddenly laughed. He shook his head and said, there's no lack of geniuses in this world, but if this junior brother Zhang has only cultivated for a little more than 100 years, then he can't be trusted. It has always been difficult for Taoists to have both divine arts and cultivation. It's like fish and bear's paw, you can't have it both ways. Take Zhou Chengju for example. He was only a few decades older than Qi Yuntian, but he had already cultivated to the 3rd level of Yuanying. This was not only because of his high aptitude, but also because he knew that he had no hope of immortality, so he did not cultivate any divine arts. Although Qi Yuntian's cultivation was not as good, he cultivated 3 divine arts at the same time. If they really fought, Zhou Chengju most likely would not be his match. Qinsang School's 5 skills and 3 scriptures, only by cultivating the corresponding divine arts could one achieve twice the result with half the effort. However, if it was just to show off in front of his peers and cultivate Dao techniques that did not match with his own, then who knows how much time would be wasted. If it was a cultivator with powerful divine arts, profound cultivation, and the path of cultivation that was faster than others, Wu Hanqing would never believe it. Those that only required time and effort would be fine, but when it came to obstacles like the burning cave or the Shell Pass, it would be easy to endure for hundreds of years. Yu Longshan harumphed and said, that's right. Those ridiculous rumors are probably made up by some rascals to raise their status. Senior Marshal Brother is a Daoist arcanist, so why would you believe those rumors? Wu Hanqing thought to himself, from Yu Longshan's tone, it seems that there is no place for this person in the competition. Strange, could it be that this Zhang Yan is really exaggerating? Although he still did not believe it, he could not help but look down on Zhang Yan. Huang Fuzhou heard Yu Longshan belittling Zhang Yan and frowned. He had lost to Zhang Yan before, so according to her words, didn't it make him look even worse? Moreover, no matter what, Zhang Yan was still one of the top 10 disciples of Qinsang school. Even if they did not get along with each other, how could they ridicule their fellow disciple in front of an outsider? He wanted to say something, but after thinking about it, he thought to himself, why should I care about this? I'll let them be. When they meet junior martial brother Zhang, they will suffer. Chapter 508. 6. In the main hall of Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake, Zhang Yan sat on a jade couch while the Good Abyss Monastery master Ma Shouxiang sat below him with a respectful expression. Although Zhang Yan was the monastery master of the lower house, after leaving the mountain to seek the Tao, the matters of the lower house were all thrown to Ma Shouxiang and the other two Daoren. In the blink of an eye, 70 years had passed since Zhang Yan became the master of the three temples. These temple masters were only at the first level of the clear Qi realm and were not as long-lived as him. Among them, Zhen Shouzhong, the head of Taiyan Temple, and He Shoushuan, the head of Virtue Cultivation Temple, had already passed away. Only Ma Shouxiang was still guarding the lower house. Without Zhang Yan's orders, Ma Shouxiang did not dare to casually change into the lower house. When he heard that Zhang Yan had returned, he hurried over to meet him. Ma Shouxiang bowed shakily and said, Monastery Master, I am old and my strength has been weakening recently. I am afraid it will be difficult for me to share the monastery master's worries. I need to choose another wise person. Zhang Yan looked at his appearance. His face was full of wrinkles, his eyes were muddy and dim, his teeth were missing and he was bald. His neck and the back of his hands that were exposed outside his robe were also loose and withered. He looked extremely old. How could he still be hale and hearty like an immortal? These words were not nonsense. However, there was a trace of nervousness in his eyes. After thinking for a while, he knew that this Daoren did not really want to take over the lower house. He was afraid that he would think that he was old and take over the lower house, so he suggested it first. It could be considered as advancing by retreating. Zhang Yan smiled and said gently, Monastery Master Ma, you have done your best to take care of the lower house for the past few decades. As far as I know, everything has been done well. Why should I entrust him to the lower house? Don't mention this matter. I will have to trouble you with the matters of the lower house. At first, Ma Shouxiang was still very nervous. Because of Zhang Yan's power, no one in the lower house dared to disobey him even when the latter was not at the mountain gate. Those arrogant aristocratic family disciples had no choice but to admit their inferiority in front of him. This feeling was truly wonderful. After Zhang Yan had returned to the mountain, he had been most afraid of being sent to the 9 cities to await his death. Now that he had heard these words, he felt much more at ease. His spirit was also much more exuberant. Standing up, he bowed and loudly said, since it is the Chancellor's concern, as long as Daoren still has a breath left in him, the matters of the lower house will not go wrong. Zhang Yan smiled. Ma Shou seemed to have thought of something and took out a few booklets from his sleeve. He respectfully placed them in front of the table and said, the name list of the lower house disciples is all here. The rules set by the monastery head have not been broken in the slightest. Zhang Yan had long since anticipated this. Although he had not been in the lower house these past few years, the rules that had been set back then were the will of the master and disciple lineage. Naturally, no one would dare to break them. He picked up the booklet and casually flipped through it, then put it back in his hand. Seeing Ma Shouxiang carefully glance at him, he couldn't help but smile and say, Monastery head Ma, if there is anything else, there is no harm in saying it. Ma Shouxiang hurriedly cupped his hands and said, it is actually a small matter, but because it involves the monastery head, I have no choice but to report it. It had something to do with him. Zhang Yan's curiosity was piqued and he said, tell me. Ma Shouxiang said, about half a year ago, there was a young man who came up the mountain to seek the Tao. There were hundreds of people like him in the lower house, but his cultivation speed was truly inconceivable. In just a few months, he had reached the first tier of essence condensation. Because his talent was extraordinary, I originally had the intention of guiding him. But when I called him over to inspect him, I discovered that he had a faint demonic aura on him. After some careful questioning, I found out that his father was a demonic cultivator. He sighed heavily and said, "Ever since my Chinsang school was founded, although there have been demonic cultivators in the sect, most of them were sent to various islands and mansions. There has never been a demonic cultivator who became a direct disciple. I originally wanted to drive him away, but who would have thought that he would suddenly mention the monastery head's name, saying that his family's ancestor had a relationship with the monastery head. Because the monastery head had not returned to the mountain at that time, we did not dare to make the decision on our own. We only allowed him to stay in the lower house and did not record him in the family tree. Actually, he could have sent this disciple to the clear serenity heavenly lake, but now that the disciples of the devil's sect were all over the world, there were many who had snuck into the Xianmen sect. He was afraid that something would go wrong, so he did not act rashly and waited for Zhang Yan to return before reporting. Zhang Yan thought about it and asked, "What is this person called?" Ma Shouxiang said, "This person calls himself Han Zuocheng." Surnamed Han. Zhang Yan's heart moved and he remembered. Back then, he had indeed promised a small Han clan that he would take in a disciple for 260 years, and he had even specially invited Lu Mainyang to go with him. This person could say his name, so he was undoubtedly a descendant of the Han clan. But why did he end up as a half-human half-demon? And why did he not bring Lu Mainyang into the mansion? Instead, he went to the lower house. There was something fishy about this matter. Zhang Yan thought about it for a while, then he picked up the chime mallet and lightly knocked on the 4 green jade chimes in his left hand. Not long later, Wang Kaiwei arrived in the hall and knelt on the ground, saying, "Disciple greets master." Zhang Yan pointed at Ma Shouxiang and said, "You go with monastery head Ma and watch over this person. Try to find out his background and don't let anything happen to him. Do you understand?" Wang Kaiwei said seriously, "Disciple understands." At this moment, he suddenly heard a clear sound. Zhang Yan looked up and saw a shining Howling Lake golden sword flying into the hall. He waved his hand and took it, immediately recognizing that it was from the Danding courtyard. He thought, so it's senior apprentice brother Zhou summoning me. It's been a long time since I've paid a visit, it's time to go. If Zhou Chengju had nothing to do, he wouldn't have come to find him, so he didn't delay. After sending the two away with a few words, he waved his sleeves and opened the array door. He flew out of the cave and rode a gust of wind towards the Danding courtyard. In less than the time it took for a joss stick to burn, he was already above the lake in the courtyard. Zhou Chengju had been waiting outside the fish boat for a long time, his eyebrows furrowed. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and slowly landed on the boat, saying, "I'm late, sorry for making senior apprentice brother wait." Zhou Chengju was thinking about something when he suddenly saw Zhang Yan coming. He was about to speak, but when he looked up, he suddenly paused, his face full of disbelief. With his cultivation, he could naturally see Zhang Yan's current cultivation. After a while, his expression became slightly excited, and he grabbed Zhang Yan's wrist, saying in surprise, "Junior apprentice brother, have you already cultivated Yuanying?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly. With a thought, an astral cloud rose from the top of his head, and the fish restaurant immediately began to sway slightly. This was the movement of the big fish carrying the boat under his feet, feeling the stellar wind leaking out. But it had been with Zhou Chengju for a long time, so it didn't panic and calmed down after a while. Zhou Chengju's chest was filled with joy, and he suddenly laughed out loud. "Junior apprentice brother, since I entered the sect, I haven't stopped thinking about how to take revenge. Today, I have seen junior apprentice brother's 100-foot pole, and I'm a step closer. I think it's not too late to get rid of the obsession in my heart." He originally thought that with his lifespan, he might not be able to last until the day Zhang Yan destroyed the Zhou clan, but now he saw some hope. Zhang Yan shook his head and said, Senior apprentice brother, I have just now entered Yuanying, and I have just obtained a cloud of stellar wind. If you want to talk about dealing with the Zhou clan, I'm afraid there's still a long way to go. Zhou Chengju was very optimistic, and he stroked his beard as he smiled, Junior apprentice brother, you don't have to be so humble. You have only cultivated for 100 years, and you already have such achievements. Not to mention that few people in Qinsang school can compare to you. Even when I was in the Zhou clan, my talent was unparalleled, and I used 130 years to enter Yuanying. I still can't compare to Junior apprentice brother. Zhang Yan rarely heard Zhou Chengju talk about his past. When he heard that senior apprentice brother Zhou used 130 years to enter Yuanying, he couldn't help but be shocked. Then, he felt that it was a pity. If Zhou Chengju's foundations hadn't been destroyed, after 300 years, he would have a chance to enter Grotto Heaven. It wasn't without reason that he hated the Zhou clan so much. Zhou Chengju was excited, and he led Zhang Yan to sit in the room. After the two of them sat down, he slowly calmed down and asked, Junior apprentice brother, I heard that you also received the invitation to the Huan River banquet? Zhang Yan nodded and said, That's right. Senior apprentice brother, do you have any advice? Zhou Chengju snorted and said, There's no good banquet. It's just a show of power. If junior apprentice brother is only in core transformation, it's better not to go. But now. He laughed coldly, as long as you don't embarrass some people too much, it's fine. He knew that Zhang Yan had learned the Taishian true light, so he was full of confidence in him. Zhang Yan smiled and said, Senior apprentice brother summoned me in a hurry for this? Zhou Chengju shook his head. He was silent for a while before he said, This time, the sword battle between the 16 sects is really dangerous, especially that item. It needs to be taken from the extreme heaven. Originally, I wanted to advise you not to go, but since junior apprentice brother has already entered Yuanying state, I hope you can go. If junior apprentice brother needs any help, just tell me. Zhang Yan nodded. So that was the case. Zhou Chengju had good intentions. He was afraid that Zhang Yan would overestimate himself and lose his life. Zhang Yan thought for a while and suddenly asked, Senior apprentice brother, do you know what that item is? Zhou Chengju was originally a direct disciple of the Zhou clan, so he knew some secrets. He hesitated for a while, as if thinking about something. After a while, he said in a low voice, I didn't want to tell junior apprentice brother about this before because it would be useless for you to know. It would only mess up your Taoist heart. Now that junior apprentice brother wants to go to the Dharma assembly, you can tell me. His lips moved, and he used telepathy to explain the origin of the item. In the end, he reminded, once this item arrives, anyone who goes to the sword battle, even if their cultivation is not good enough and they can't go to the extreme heaven, as long as their Taoist heart is clear, they might be able to gain some benefits. When the time comes, I'm afraid it won't just be the 16 sects of the Donghua continent. Cultivators from other continents overseas might also bring their disciples. You need to be careful. When Zhang Yan heard about the item, his eyes kept flashing, and his chest was like a raging sea. He only calmed down after a while. Chapter 509. P.S. What a tragedy, I get sleepy when it's hot and accidentally dozed off. It's a little late. 2 months later, Huan River continent. Madame Chen led a dozen maids on a cloud, walking on a rainbow bridge that was faintly glowing. She was ordering the servants to hang up the lanterns and decorate the place, meticulously preparing for the banquet in a month's time. This banquet was originally for the 3 elders of Pingdu sect, but Madame Chen wanted to use this opportunity to promote her husband, Huxian. She looked up and saw that under the misty night sky, there was a faintly discernible flying pavilion that was surrounded by clouds and mist. A bright moon hung on the eaves like a plate of ice, and the scene was magnificent, as if it was a fairyland in the mortal world. She looked at it for a while, and her beautiful eyes became slightly blurred. After a long time, she regained her composure and said to the maidservant beside her, Remember, drive away all the birds inside and outside the water continent. On the 15th of the next month, if one of them flies above the clouds and obstructs the scenery, I will hold you responsible." All the maids hurriedly responded. There were a total of 18 celestial islands in this Huan River continent, and they were connected by flying bridges. On the flat ground, warm water-kissed rocks, cranes and birds flew. The scenery was very unique. The most miraculous thing was that there was a lake at the center of each of the 18 islands. Every 15th day of the month, the lake would reflect the shadow of a bright moon, and when the time came, the light would carry the water up into the sky, and it would stop when it arrived at the pavilion in the sky, causing a river of water in the sky that was like a jade belt to ripple out, and the 18 bright moons would circle and dance around it. It could be said to be a peerlessly miraculous scene. Those who admired the moon sat in the pavilion to admire the moonlight, which was a pleasure for celestials, so this pavilion was also called Moon-Seizing Pavilion. After Lady Chen walked a few rounds, she got off the Rainbow Bridge. Across the sparkling river, she saw Huxian standing on a rock in the middle of the lake. She pointed to his feet and brought a servant girl behind her. She floated over like a cloud and landed beside Huxian. She said softly, "Master, what do you think of this servant's arrangement? Is it good?" Huxian turned around and looked at the lanterns and pearls that could be seen everywhere on the surface of the lake. He smiled and said, "Anything that Madam passes through must be good." Madam Chen glared at him and complained. He grumbled, "Master, this servant is working so hard for you. Don't be too careless." Huxian pretended to be helpless as he said, "With Madam taking care of things, your husband is naturally at ease. There's no need to worry about this, right?" Although Madam Chen had a look of resentment on her face, she was actually delighted in her heart. She said, "Kaiju, let's go and ignore him." A pretty maid following her hurriedly bowed to Huxian. She stole another glance at him before following Madam Chen. After the two of them left, Huxian saw two maids walking towards him. He frowned slightly and said, "Wait here. I'll go take a walk in the water pavilion." The two maids looked at each other and agreed in a low voice. Then, they stopped walking. Huxian stomped his foot and flew up to the floating pavilion. He stood on the roof with a cold gaze. Since he sat on the first position of the top 10 disciples, he had almost always relied on his extraordinary means to do things. He had never asked even one person in the Qin clan to help him. He thought that after a long time, his identity would gradually fade. However, Madam Chen just had to interfere in this banquet. It was as if she was afraid that people didn't know that he was the son-in-law of the Qin clan. This made him very unhappy. However, he also knew now was not the time to act up. He would wait until he returned from the sword competition. Once he returned from the sword competition, he wouldn't need to care too much about the Qin clan. When Madam Chen arrived at an island in the southeast, she suddenly saw a fragrant wind in the sky. A brilliant cloud of light came over and a middle-aged beauty stood on it. Her eyes couldn't help but light up and reveal a look of joy. She stomped her feet and the cloud carried her up into the sky. She bowed and said, "Third aunt, why are you here?" This aunt of hers was called Qin Xiaoling. She was originally married to Xiao Mu. However, after the latter's fate was unknown, she felt that the residence was too cold and lonely and returned to live in the Qin clan. She had always been in contact with Qin Xiaoling. Qin Xiaoling walked forward and held Madam Chen's arm. She moved closer to her ear and asked impatiently, "Niece Qing, will that Zhang Yan come this time?" Madam Chen was startled. She hesitated for a moment and said, "Aunt, I have already sent someone to send an invitation. This person will come." Logically speaking, the top 10 disciples of the sect would send an invitation. However, she didn't know Zhang Yan at all. If it wasn't for this aunt insisting on inviting him, why would she specially care about this matter? After the invitation was sent, she didn't ask about it again. She didn't know whether Zhang Yan would come or not. She was just casually answering. Qin Xiaoling didn't hear the uncertainty in her words and said with hatred, "That year, Zhang Yan caused my master's whereabouts to be unknown. This time, I will definitely teach him a lesson." Madam Chen comforted her, "Aunt, don't worry. My master listens to me. He is the head of the top 10 disciples. Who would dare to disobey him? When the time comes, he will find an excuse to teach him a lesson on your behalf." Chen Xiaoling held her hand tightly and said gratefully, "Niece Qing is considerate." Actually, she didn't think very highly of Madam Chen. Perhaps in Madam Chen's own eyes, Hu Xian was obedient to her. However, as an outsider, she could see things clearly. She had secretly noticed that Hu Xian was a very opinionated person. Perhaps he didn't care about small matters, but when it came to big matters, he might not be accommodating. Especially when Hu Xian wasn't Qi Yuntian. He had only been in his position for a few decades. His prestige and cultivation level weren't enough to suppress the other 9 disciples. He could only try to win them over and not force them. Therefore, she already had other plans for this matter. The 2 women chatted for a while until the sky turned white. Chen Xiaoling bid farewell to Madam Chen and flew up the clouds to return to the Yanlong continent. Half an hour later, she landed in the courtyard of her own residence. A maidservant came up and whispered a few words in her ear. She nodded and walked into the house. She walked through the halls and entered the backyard. After lifting the bead curtain, she saw a man with dark skin and a face that looked like he had been through hardship sitting in the hall. He was Doran's disciple. She waved her hand and said to the maidservant behind her, "All of you, leave." When only she and Doran were left in the house, she waved her hand and opened the barrier. She said, "Elder Hu, why are you here?" That Doran's disciple opened his eyes and stroked the goatee on his chin. He said, "I have thought about this matter, but I still feel that it's inappropriate." Chen Xiaoling was startled. Then, she said angrily, "We have already agreed on this matter. Is Elder Hu going to go back on his words?" Elder Hu frowned. He said, "Madam Xiao, when did I agree on anything with you? What did I promise you?" Chen Xiaoling snorted and sat down on a chair at the side. After a moment of silence, she said slowly, "What do you want?" Elder Hu narrowed his eyes. "As a Yuanying cultivator and an elder of Pingda's sect, Madam wants me to bully a core formation junior and humiliate him. If word of this gets out, it will be too unpleasant. I am also risking my reputation by doing this. Madam Xiao, can you give me half of the treasure first?" Chen Xiaoling's expression did not look too good. She said angrily, "Elder Hu, I have already given you a lot of pills from my residence. Is that not enough?" Elder Hu's expression turned cold. He said impatiently, "Madam Xiao, do you think that I am greedy for your pills? If it weren't for the friendship between your father and me and your pleading, this old man wouldn't have agreed to this matter. I'll send a disciple to return those elixirs to you tomorrow. Forgive me for not being able to keep you company." After saying that, he cupped his hands and walked out. Chen Xiaoling suddenly became anxious. She stood at the door and said, "Elder Hu, can this matter not be discussed?" Elder Hu shook his head. This was a competition between 2 sects, especially in the territory of his sect. As a guest, he couldn't go overboard. Even if he managed to win against his opponent by a little, he would try his best to give his opponent a way out so that they could meet again in the future. However, Chen Xiaoling's request did not give him any face at all. Even if it was as she had said, that Zhang Yan had already lost his power in the sect. Doing such a thing was extremely taboo. If it wasn't for the fact that the benefits she promised him were truly great, he would not have agreed to her request without much thought. Chen Xiaoling saw that Elder Hu did not say anything, and her heart suddenly became chaotic. She also knew that with her ability, she could not do anything to Zhang Yan. Even the aristocratic families could not do anything to him on the surface. However, she also had some understanding of the current situation in the sect. She knew that Daoist Peng had helped her disciple Qin Nan to take the position. This was the time when Zhang Yan was at his weakest. It was the best time to deal with him. She gritted her teeth and said, "Elder Hu, wait a moment." Elder Hu faintly said, although he looked cold, he was actually very proud. He had tested her a few times before and could see that Qin Xiaoling had a deep obsession in her heart. Apart from him, she seemed to have no one else to ask for help. Didn't that mean that she was at his mercy? He even dared to say that so long as he persistently refused, then perhaps the other party would obediently hand over the treasure in order to beg him to make a move. However, even though he was confident in this, he couldn't guarantee that something unexpected would happen at that time. Thus, he wasn't willing to go too far and only hoped to obtain half of the treasure first. Qin Xiaoling quickly turned around and lightly withdrew a dazzling talisman shell from her pouch, and then she passed it to Elder Hu. This was a defensive treasure of the Qin clan, and it was called the Dual Qi Divine Light Talisman Shell. Every direct descendant of the Qin clan possessed one. This one was left behind by her father, and he had left it for her before he passed away. Now that she had to hand it over, she felt extremely pained. But besides this, she was really unable to think of anything else that could make this elder make a move. Even then, he still took into consideration the friendship between him and her father all those years ago, otherwise, he would utterly not accept this matter. Elder Hu picked up the talisman shell and placed it before his eyes to carefully examine it. After looking at it for a long time, his eyes glowed brightly as he praised. It really is the Dual Qi Divine Light Talisman Shell. Having such a treasure in hand is no less than having an extra life. Madam Qin couldn't help but remind him. This is a Yang energy talisman, and there's also a Yin energy talisman. Both of them are used together in order to display its might. Elder, don't go back on your word. Elder Hu smiled lightly and didn't say anything as he placed the talisman in his sleeve, and then he cupped his hands and said, I'll naturally deal with that junior surnamed Zhang during the river rinse banquet. Madam Xiao, just prepare the Yang energy talisman. Chapter 510. A month passed quickly, and it was already the 15th of the month. Tens of thousands of lights floated above the Huan River Island. They were as bright as stars, as impressive as the fire in a furnace, like a flourishing firework. They clustered around the 18 islands, and the clear water ripples reflected the light. It was as if a silver river was flowing backwards, flowing into the river, washing the beach and stones, making the sound of the waves. On the main island, there was a magnificent palace with jade railings and pearl railings. Thousands of bright red lanterns were hung high under the eaves. In front of the palace, there was a lake that was a few acres in size. On both sides of the lake were colorful candles that were countless inches tall. The candlelight was like a bean, glowing quietly. In the water, there were even koi fish holding pearls in their mouths, holding them above the surface of the lake. Although it was already night, the entire water continent was still illuminated by these bright lights, as if it was daytime. Even from thousands of miles away, one could still see the bright lights on this side of the land, like torches, shooting into the sky, flashing endlessly. The palace on the island was on a hill, and it looked down at the island. The river was wide, and one could see everything by leaning on the railings. However, when guests arrived, everyone in the palace would know in advance. Although the Huan River banquet this time was nominally a banquet for the 3 elders of Pingdu sect and their disciples who had come from afar, it was actually a competition. Therefore, not only did the top 10 disciples of the Yingzang sect all receive the invitation, there were also many junior disciples from the sect who came on Dharma vessels to watch. However, their status was low and they could not enter the hall, so they could only watch from afar. Originally, the cold river was quiet and cold, but because of the addition of thousands of disciples, it became much more lively. At 4:45 in the morning, guests arrived one after another. Most of them came on clouds, but they were all disciples of scattered sects and unaffiliated sections. After Huxian became the first of the 10 disciples, he sent many disciples to guard these sections. However, there were many disciples of his direct bloodline who were cultivating in Qinsang school, and they were also invited to the banquet. These people were not qualified enough for Huxian to personally welcome them. Logically, it should have been his disciples. However, as the son-in-law of the Chen clan, he had never trained a disciple, so the people who went to welcome them were all disciples of the Chen clan. Although his expression remained the same, he hated this identity even more in his heart. Suddenly, a gust of wind and smoke flew above the main hall. After circling one round, it bypassed the welcoming disciples and entered the hall. When the smoke dissipated, the person who appeared was a Taoist who was covered in dirt and looked extremely unkempt. This Taoist priest's eyes and eyebrows were actually quite delicate, but his beard was unshaven and his lips were greasy. He drowsily glanced at the guests of honor, wiped his face, and loudly said to Huxian, "Senior Marshal Brother Hua, I heard that you organized a banquet, so I, Zhou Yong, came uninvited today to ask for a bowl of water and wine to drink. Does Senior Marshal Brother allow me?" Huxian smiled and said, "Junior Brother Zhou is a rare guest. Normally, I would not be able to invite you even if I wanted to. I am very happy that you could come. Please take a seat." Zhou Yong laughed and cupped his hands. Amidst the whispers of the crowd, he picked an inconspicuous corner and sat down. Ignoring the others, he grabbed the wine pot and gulped down a few mouthfuls before sitting alone at the table and chewing. Huxian sighed, "Since he's here, he's a guest. He's also your 15th sister's husband, so I have to give him face." Huxian sighed, "Since he's here, he's a guest. He's also your 15th sister's husband, so I have to give him some face." Chen Sui didn't care. She glanced at Zhou Yong and snorted, "My Chen family's face is about to be lost because of him." Huxian's eyes were calm, and he didn't say anything. After a moment, he suddenly sensed something and looked up. From afar, he saw a beautiful figure treading on mist. His breathing could not help but stagnate slightly. A voice sounded from outside. "Clear Crawl Island's Island Lord Han has arrived." After Han Sui landed, she waved her sleeves and gently waved away the mist around her. She walked gracefully into the palace and bowed to Huxian and his wife. She raised her head slightly and glanced at Huxian. The moment their gazes met, Huxian looked slightly unnatural, but Chen Sui didn't notice. Han Sui lowered her head and didn't speak to anyone else. She moved her slender feet and sat down. When everyone saw her cold demeanor and that she was sitting among the top 10 disciples, they didn't dare to rashly approach her. At this moment, there was a sharp sound as a cold sword energy broke through the palace and entered. Before everyone could react, a young and handsome Taoist in a green robe had already arrived. His expression was grave and stern, and he was filled with a sharp spirit. He was like an unsheathed sword, cold and oppressive. It made people unconsciously want to stay away from him. He didn't say anything and just cupped his hands at Huxian as a greeting. Chen Sui was a bit unhappy, but Huxian didn't care. He laughed and said, "Junior Brother Ning is here." He knew that Junior Brother Ning hadn't been cultivating for a long time, but he was now in the 3rd tier of the core transformation realm. He was the only one in the sect who cultivated the 1000 Cloud Sword Manual. He couldn't see how powerful this killing technique was, but once he entered the Yuanying realm, he didn't know how many people could be his opponent, so he didn't dare to look down on it. Not long after Ning Chongxian sat down, 2 rays of light, one golden and one red, flew out of the clouds. They were as fast as lightning. Just now, everyone saw a blur, and the 2 Taoists landed in front of the palace. And NBS the Taoist on the left had a straight nose and thin lips. His eyes were cold, and he wore a snow-white robe that didn't have a speck of dust. Huxian stood up to welcome them. He took a few steps forward and said, "Junior Brother Du and Junior Brother Xiao came at the right time. Please come in and sit." Duda and Xiaoling couldn't go to the sword competition, so they weren't interested in fighting with the elders of Pingdu sect. They didn't want to come, but they were disciples of an aristocratic family in Qinsang school, so they had to show some respect to Huxian. After some polite greetings, the 2 sat down. Besides the competition every 24 years, the 10 great disciples of the sect rarely made an appearance in front of their fellow disciples. Less than half of the 1000+ junior disciples outside the main hall had only heard of their reputations, but they'd never seen them in person. At this moment, when they saw 5 of them, they couldn't help but stare with their eyes wide open and exclaim with satisfaction, and they felt that this trip wasn't in vain. Hu Xian thought, this time junior brother Zhuang and junior sister Qin didn't come, so junior brother Luo and junior brother Zhang haven't come. Since Zhuang Bufan was defeated by Luo Qingyu in the last competition, he had been cultivating in his cave residence for decades and had never left the island. He was still in closed-door training. As for Qin Nan, it was said that she was cultivating under the guidance of Immortal Peng, so she didn't have time to come. At the end of the Su hour, a green light filled the sky. At first, there was the bleak sound of wind blowing leaves, but after a few breaths, there was the rumbling of thunder. Everyone in the seats stood up and looked in shock. The disciples outside the hall widened their eyes. They didn't know who it was that had such power. Someone who recognized it shouted, "It's Sage Luo. He's here." Hu Xian stood up and walked out of the hall. He looked up at the sky. Chen hesitated for a moment and followed him. Luo Qingyu was sitting in a flying carriage with green feathers. His Taoist bun was pulled up high, and he was in high spirits. There were two boys standing on his left and right, one holding a thunder branch and the other a bamboo leaf. There were also dozens of strong men following him. The more than 1,000 disciples outside the hall were envious. Traveling on a flying chariot with a child was something only nascent soul-perfected ones in the sect could do. Luo Qingyu stopped the carriage in front of the hall. After he came out, he smiled and bowed to Immortal Hua, "Greetings, senior brother Hua." Hu Xian returned a bow. He was not friends with Luo Qingyu, but he was a Yuanying immortal, so he did not lack etiquette. He personally sent Luo Qingyu to the banquet, which was a courtesy that no one else could compare with. Just now, Hu Xian came out and there was a commotion outside the hall. The disciples were shouting and pointing to the sky. "The elders of Daoping Metropolis are here." A cloud raft floated over from afar. 3 old Taoists sat on it in a triangular formation. There was another person beside them. He had delicate features and wore a moon-white robe. He was none other than Zhong Muqing, who was ranked second among the top 10 disciples of the sect. All 4 of them were nascent soul cultivators. When they sat together, their aura kept overflowing, and the river beneath them seemed to be swept up by a hurricane, churning up and down. More than 10 disciples followed behind them. Wu Hanchen was among them. The island lord of Yangyue Island, Huang Fuzhou, and his wife came with them. Hu Xian and Chen Muqing did not dare to be rude. They stepped out of the hall and went up to the clouds. They exchanged greetings with the 3 elders in the sky. After some time, they landed in the hall together and were seated according to the host and the guest. This great hall had been deliberately arranged by Chen Feng to distinguish the hierarchy. Therefore, it descended like a staircase and was divided into 3 levels. Hu Xian's seat was the highest. The first seat to his left was occupied by Zhong Muqing and Luo Qingyu. They sat opposite the 3 Pingdu sect elders. More than 10 disciples of Pingdu sect and the rest of Qinsang school were all core formation cultivators. Therefore, they sat on the second level's high platform. Further down were the scattered and unorthodox disciples. When the time came, they would have to look up to them. Although Pingdu sect and Qinsang school were allies, it was only limited to the previous generation. The disciples of this generation did not interact much and were not familiar with each other. Although Pingdu sect and Qinsang school were on good terms, it was only limited to the previous generation. The disciples of this generation did not interact much and were not familiar with each other. The purpose of this banquet was to test the strength of Qinsang. However, they knew that they could not provoke the 3 Yuanying Zhenren, Hua, Zhong, and Luo. Therefore, most of their attention was focused on Du De, Shaoling, Ning Chongxian, and the others. Elder who looked over and realized that there was an empty seat opposite them. He glanced at the people of Qinsang school and smiled. He gave a look to the disciple beside him. The disciple understood and immediately said loudly, "I heard that a disciple of your sect has achieved first-grade core. Will he be here today?" Hu Xian said, "That is junior brother Zhang Yan from our sect. He is also invited to the banquet, but he has not arrived yet." That person suddenly smiled and said sarcastically, "Could it be that he heard that we are here and wanted to compete, so he did not dare to come?" Wu Qinghan looked over in surprise. He did not know why this junior brother would say that. His words were obviously provocative. This disciple did not say that without reason. Firstly, he was indeed very arrogant and thought highly of himself. Secondly, elder who had specially instructed him in secret. Qin Xian was very displeased. He asked the servant beside him, "The guests have arrived, but Zhang Yan has not arrived yet. Did he say anything?" The servant shook her head and only said that she did not know. Qin Xian was unhappy. What is wrong with this junior brother Zhang? The invitation was sent 3 months ago. Even if there were any changes, he should have sent someone to inform us. Why did he not say anything? How unruly. Chapter 247, Hidden Blade at the Banquet Under the Moon. Chapter 247, Hidden Blade at the Banquet Under the Moon. Chapter 511. Seeing that Zhang Yan might not attend the banquet, Elder Hu's eyes flickered and he stroked his beard. Although he had promised Qin Xiaoling that he would try to suppress Zhang Yan, he couldn't be blamed if they didn't meet at the banquet. He didn't have any deep hatred with Zhang Yan, but he had to show up because of the 2 divine light talismans. It would be best if he could take care of Zhang Yan at the banquet. Since he couldn't meet him, there was no need to cause more trouble. Qin Xiaoling couldn't blame him for not working hard either. However, just now, his disciple's words were too provocative, so he had to think of a way to turn things around for him, lest he offended someone for no reason before he got any benefits. He looked left and right, then raised his hand and pointed at the disciple, saying, "You may not know this, but this disciple of mine can be considered to have a bit of luck. He once obtained the inheritance of a loose immortal sword technique in the wilderness, and he even asked the elders of his sect to refine a sword pellet. After obtaining this technique, he diligently practiced day and night. Ever since he heard that fellow Taoist Zhang Yan of the Yutsang sect is proficient in the art of using flying swords to kill enemies, and is also a rare first-grade core formation cultivator throughout the ages, he had the intention to compare himself with fellow Taoist Zhang Yan. Presumably, he was also disappointed, so he didn't choose his words carefully." Everyone looked over in surprise. Just now, they knew that this competitor was also a sword cultivator, so it was no wonder he was so arrogant. At this moment, Zhong Muqing's eyes flickered and he suddenly said, "If this fellow Taoist wants to spar with junior brother Zhang, it's easy. Junior brother Zhang's cave abode is at the clear Serenity Heavenly Lake. I'll bring you there to visit him next time. I think he won't reject you." That Pingde disciple had just been praised by his master in front of everyone. He instantly felt his body heating up, he became excited and seemed to be a little restless. When he heard Zhong Muqing's words, he immediately wanted to agree without hesitation. Elder Hu frowned, but reached out his hand to stop him from speaking. He was rather scheming as well, and he faintly sensed that Zhong Muqing seemed to be intentionally provoking him to fight Zhang Yan. Even though he didn't know what Zhong Muqing's objective was, he couldn't act according to Zhong Muqing's intentions, so he shouted, "My disciple, even though this fellow Taoist Zhang possesses an extremely great reputation, he's only ranked at the 9th position in Qinsang School. Is there anyone present here that isn't ranked above him? If you want to ask for advice, you can always find an opponent. Why do you have to give up what is near and seek what is far away?" Zhong Muqing only smiled ambiguously and didn't say anything else. Elder Hu was prepared to stop here, but his disciple misunderstood his master's meaning. He did not sit down, but turned around to look around, cupped his hands, and proudly said, "I am Ding Wei, willing to ask for guidance from everyone." Elder Hu had just picked up his wine cup, but his movement stopped. He looked at his disciple in shock and cursed in his heart. Everyone in Qinsang School, except for Xiao Chua, who showed some interest, people like Duda, Ning Chongxian, and the others acted as if they didn't hear anything. They looked indifferent, as if the person in front of them was not worthy of their attention. Ding Wei couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed when there was no response. He shouted again, but it was still ignored. He was instantly embarrassed and felt a little embarrassed. He stomped his feet, and a faint green sword light shot out from his back. He sneered and said, "Could it be that everyone in Qinsang School is a coward?" As soon as he said this, Huang Fuzhou sneered and waved his sleeve to release a bright starlight, which went straight to Ding Wei's face. Ding Wei was excited when he saw that someone was making a move. He directed the flying sword to cut the starlight. In the past, his sword light was always successful. He thought that he could cut the starlight with one strike, but the result was beyond his expectation. The sword ball and the starlight trembled and seemed to fall into a muddy mud. The starlight shattered and attached to the sword ball bit by bit. In an instant, it was covered with a layer of black gas. The sword ball, which was originally light and agile, was now burdened with a heavy burden. Its rotation was much more sluggish, and even the feeling in the divine will gradually faded, as if it was about to separate from itself. He couldn't help but be shocked. Huang Fuzhou's expression remained unchanged. His twin-pole starnet magnetism was a technique that specialized in countering sword cultivators. All those years ago when he hadn't cultivated it successfully, he'd barely defeated the sword immortal Luo Yuanhua. Even though he'd lost to Zhang Yan during the sex competition, his true strength was still extremely outstanding. When he showed this move, the other disciples of Pingdu's sect looked over in surprise. Even Wu Hanqing was moved. He also knew about Ding Wei's ability. Although he was a little arrogant, he was considered outstanding among the few of them. Huang Fuzhou was famous, but he was not one of the top 10 disciples of Qinsang School. Although he usually talked and laughed with him, he did not really think much of him. He did not expect Ding Wei to have such ability at all. Huang Fuzhou looked very sincere. He said, "Junior brother Ding, please forgive me for saying too much. If this is all you have, I'm afraid you are not junior brother Zhang's opponent." Ding Wei's face immediately turned red. His lineage sword impartation actually had its own way of doing things. There was a green dragon spirit hidden in the sword, and it was very powerful. If he had released it, it would not have been so easily subdued. However, he was too careless and missed the opportunity. The bipolar star magnet light wrapped around the sword pill and blocked his spiritual sense. Now, he did not even have the chance to use this move. Wu Hanqing couldn't bear to watch any longer. He didn't want to see his fellow disciple lose face and was about to step in to help. However, Zhou Yong, who was sitting below, suddenly wiped his mouth and threw away the wine jug in his hand. He opened his mouth and spat out a yellow gas. Inside the gas was a fist-sized rock. It floated in the air as if it was about to fall. The deterrence it contained was self-evident. Wu Hanqing immediately did not dare to move. A bitter smile appeared on his face. The rock gave him the feeling that it was as heavy as a mountain. If it fell, it would definitely shatter the hall. He was here to attend the banquet, not to fight to the death. Why did he have to make it so ugly? The three elders of Pingdu looked at each other. They were shocked. Qinsang School was indeed a school that had existed for tens of thousands of years. The depth of their heritage was unfathomable. Whether it was Zhou Yong or Huang Fuzhou, they were not qualified to sit at the same table as the top 10 disciples. Yet, they were so powerful. Looking at their cultivation and methods, there were probably only 2 or 3 disciples of the same generation in the school who could compare to them. Chen Fujin frowned. She was from a large clan and believed that cultivators of Xianmen should have some demeanor of immortals. If they wanted to fight, they could wait until the banquet was halfway through. When the mood was high, they could exchange a few blows. Now that the wine had not even been touched, the atmosphere was already tense. She did not like it. She felt that these people did not know the rules. At this moment, although Ding Wei was restrained, she refused to admit defeat. The other people were pressured by Zhou Yong from the side and could not help her. The situation was in a stalemate. As the host of the banquet, Hu Xian felt that it was not good to embarrass the Dou sect too much. He straightened his body slightly and was about to mediate, but at this moment, his expression changed and he suddenly turned to look outside. The people at the banquet suddenly felt a strange feeling in their hearts. On the table, the wine cups and plates were shaking slightly. The lanterns outside the hall were also swaying left and right. Even the candlelight was suppressed. But after a few breaths, the wind and rain outside suddenly became fierce. Their feet shook even more violently. It was as if they were on a boat swaying in the wind and rain. This strange phenomenon surprised everyone in the hall. They did not know what was happening. Suddenly, the light dimmed and the bright lights surrounding the hall suddenly went far away. Chen Fujin's face turned cold. She stood up and shouted, "What's going on?" A servant girl holding a long whip rushed into the hall and said anxiously, "Fujin, I don't know why those pearl-bearing koi suddenly abandoned the island. I can't control them no matter what." Chen Fujin's mood became even worse. She had spent a lot of effort to decorate the Huan River banquet tonight. Now, before the banquet even started, there was an inexplicable fight. Now, there was such a sudden joke. Where was she going to put her face? She resisted the urge to kill the servant girl. She pointed outside and scolded, "Why are you so useless? I don't care what you do, go and call those animals back." The servant girl did not dare to disobey. Her pretty face was pale as she retreated. Hua Xian's gaze was fixed on the surface of the water. He saw that the pearl-bearing koi had gone far away. No matter how hard the servant girl tried to control the koi with her whip, it was ignored. At the end of the horizon, there seemed to be huge waves. He thought to himself, could it be that senior apprentice brother Qi is here? After a while, the crowd could only hear the sound of the waves crashing. There was a faint sound of a dragon's roar coming from the wind and rain. An overwhelming pressure came crashing down. The faces of the three Pingdu sect elders changed at the same time. They did not know who had entered this place. How could there be such power? Zhong Muqing and Luo Qingyu had already entered the state of Yuanying. They could sense the power of this supernatural power that could change the world. Zhong Muqing smiled faintly. He stood up and looked around. He said confidently, "It must be senior apprentice brother." Du De, Xiao Chua, Ning Chongxian, and even Han Yi heard this. They became serious and stood up unconsciously. Commanding the marine animals and commanding the wind and rain. Only the dragon carp from the Xianshui palace could do this. Hua Xian no longer had any doubts. He stood up and said in a deep voice, "Everyone, follow me to welcome senior apprentice brother." The three Pingdu sect elders were relieved when they heard that Qi Yunya was here. Elder Hu put down his wine cup and laughed, "Since Qi Zhen has entered, we should go out and greet him." He then led the disciples out of the hall. Everyone rushed to the shore, only to see that the koi fish on the shore were like subjects waiting for their king. They lined up in 2 rows, their light extending into the distance. Not long after, they saw an incomparably large strange dragon fish waving its tail in the black clouds and gales, stirring up wind and rain as it rode the waves over. The 1,000 or so dark azure disciples in the outer hall were all stunned for a moment. Pingdu sect elder Hua praised, "That must be the dragon carp. Seeing is believing. Only someone like Qi Zhenjin can subdue such a great demon." Luo Qingyu smiled and pointed to the front and said, "This dragon carp was caught by eldest senior apprentice brother in the northern underworld continent years ago. Because its cultivation is not inferior to a level 3 original infant realm cultivator, it took eldest senior apprentice brother a lot of effort to catch it." Hearing that this demon was so powerful, the Pingdu sect core formation realm disciples could not help but exclaim in admiration. Wu Hanqing felt uncomfortable when he saw this, but then he thought, among the disciples of the Qinsang school, only Qi Yunyao is this powerful. With this thought, he calmed down a little. The dragon carp danced on the waves and soon approached them. A handsome young Taoist stood on its back. The dragon carp was ferocious, but it was obedient under his feet. It was Xing Ruo's pet. Everyone saw the person's face clearly. It was not Qi Yunyao and they were stunned. Zhong Muqing's expression froze and revealed a look of disbelief. Chapter 5:12. P.S. Today's first update. After Zhang Yan greeted them, the people on the shore all had different expressions on their faces. Hu Xian walked out from the crowd, his gaze focused on Zhang Yan, and he solemnly saluted, "Greetings, junior brother Zhang." Luo Qingyu looked at the dragon carp and looked deeply at Zhang Yan. He hesitated for a moment before he walked up and gave a Dao salute. Zhong Muqing took a deep breath and took a step forward. He returned the salute without saying a word. Regardless of their previous friendship, since they were all perfected Yuanying, they could not be rude. On the Huan River continent, the three perfected Yuanying returned the salute to Zhang Yan at the same time. The crowd had yet to recover from the shock of Zhang Yan coming on the dragon carp. At this moment, when they saw the scene in front of them, some of them had already guessed something. However, this conclusion was too unbelievable, and they did not dare to believe it at the moment. After the thousands of disciples outside the Huan River continent knew the identity of the person who came, they were instantly excited. They were inexplicably excited and kept making noise. They had heard many rumors about Zhang Yan. Now that they had finally seen his face, they could not help but be excited, especially since Zhang Yan's appearance was extraordinary. When he stood on the dragon carp's back, the sleeves of his black robe fluttered in the wind, and he looked like a real immortal. Among the top 10 disciples in the sect, only Zhang Yan was not a disciple of the perfected Grotto Heaven, nor was he from any aristocratic family. This made the junior disciples see some hope, as if they could walk on the path to heaven like him in the future. Hu Xian was extremely polite and said, "Junior brother Zhang, just now, I was still thinking. Could it be that you were too diligent and forgot the time of the banquet?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Since senior brother Hu invited me, how can I not come?" Hu Xian smiled and nodded. He took a step forward and made an inviting gesture, saying, "Junior brother, please come in." Zhang Yan tiptoed and floated down from the dragon carp's back. He followed Hu Xian into the hall. Hu Xian thought to himself as he walked, "Eldest senior brother actually lent this dragon carp to junior brother Zhang, what is his intention behind this?" He had never seen the dragon carp in the Xianshui True Palace. He only thought that Qi Yuntian had lent it to Zhang Yan, but he never thought that Zhang Yan had obtained it from somewhere else. He also did not think that Zhang Yan had the ability to subdue it. He was only thinking about who should he choose for the duel. Were there any changes in the sect? Not to mention him, most of the people here also thought so. At this moment, they were all pondering over the deeper meaning of this and were momentarily silent. Zhong Muqing's eyes flashed. He took a few steps back and looked to the side. Coincidentally, the Pingde sect elder with the surname Hua also looked over. He even smiled and nodded at him. Zhong Muqing was instantly relieved. Because of this, everyone had their own thoughts. Thus, no one noticed the exchange between the two of them. Elder who didn't recognize Zhang Yan, so he was just standing among the crowd and watching. When he stood among the crowd and watched, he felt that this person's appearance seemed to be different from the rumored Qi Yuntian. When he introduced himself, he was shocked. This person is Zhang Yan. How can he have Yuanying cultivation? Thinking of the promise he made to Qin Xiaoling, he instantly hesitated. It was not a big deal to deal with a core formation disciple, but it was different for perfected Yuanying. Before he came to Qinsang school, he had already found out that among the top 10 disciples, only Hu Xian, Zhong Muqing, and Luo Qingyu had reached the nascent soul stage and could attend the sword duel. But now, Zhang Yan suddenly appeared, and he even came riding Qi Yuntian's mount. There was more to this than meets the eye. If it was involved in the internal conflict of Qinsang school, it would not be good for him to lose. It would not be good for him to win either. He even faintly suspected that Qin Xiaoling already knew about this and secretly set a trap for him. After thinking about it repeatedly, he immediately had an idea. He decided to simply ignore this matter to avoid getting into trouble. After the banquet, he could just take the Yang talisman and leave. What could Qin Xiaoling do to him? Not long after, everyone arrived at the hall. Hu Xian suddenly realized that with Zhang Yan's current cultivation, it would be inappropriate to let him sit on the lower steps. Although it was easy to move another seat up, it was not that simple. Everyone, including him, who was sitting on that seat, was going to the sword duel. Moreover, there were only 3 of them. If he hastily invited Zhang Yan to sit on that seat in front of the 3 elders of Pingde sect, he would not be able to bear the consequences. Zhang Yan seemed to see that he was in a difficult position. He smiled faintly and sat down on the seat reserved for his family. Hu Xian was slightly relieved and sighed. "Junior brother, I have wronged you." He cupped his hands and returned to the main seat. Seeing that he was seated, everyone also returned to their seats. However, Madame Chen felt that Hu Xian was being too courteous to Zhang Yan. She was a little dissatisfied. "Master, you are the seat leader of the 10 disciples. Why are you so polite to Zhang Yan?" Hu Xian frowned and said in a low voice, "I have my reasons." "Madam, don't say any more." Madame Chen looked at him in shock. Hu Xian was usually obedient to her. Why would he speak to her in such a tone? She opened her red lips and wanted to say something. However, it was not good to lose her temper during the banquet. Her expression changed a few times, but she finally held it in. At that moment, Qin Xiaoling was mixed in with the thousands of disciples. Although she was not qualified to enter the hall, she had been watching from the outside. Originally, she thought that Zhang Yan did not show up and was inevitably disappointed. However, now that he had arrived, the hatred in her eyes intensified. How could she bear it? She could not wait for Elder Hu to make a move. However, after watching for a while, she did not see any movement. She frowned and sneered. She took out a talisman shell. There was only a thin layer of light on the talisman shell. It was like the hazy moonlight. She pinched a corner of the talisman shell and muttered something. At that moment, Elder Hu suddenly felt some movement in his sleeve. After checking, he found that there was something wrong with the Yang talisman. It kept emitting white light as if it was going to fly away. He was shocked and hurriedly circulated his mana to try to suppress it. However, he soon found that no matter how he tried to calm it down, the talisman shell did not listen to him. It was still throbbing. After thinking about it carefully, he unconsciously realized and cursed, it must be that lowly servant's trick. At that time, Qin Xiaoling was willing to take out the Yin Yang talisman shell so easily not because she had been captured, but because she had done it on purpose. Even though the Yin Yang talisman shell could be used separately, the disciples of the Qin clan had a method to control it. Even if one of them fell into the hands of another, they only had to use a technique to easily take it back. She was using this to remind Elder Hu that if he was unwilling to make a move against Zhang Yan, then don't even think of taking it for free. Elder Hu thought that he had gained an advantage, yet he never expected that Qin Xiaoling would make a fool out of him. He couldn't help but feel annoyed in his heart. Right when he was hesitating whether he should make a move or not, he didn't notice that his disciple, Ding Wei, was staring at Zhang Yan and seemed to be eager to make a move. Ding Wei was stunned by the monstrous might of the dragon whale earlier and hadn't recovered from his shock for a long time. When he found out that the person before him was Zhang Yan, he couldn't help but have other thoughts. This Zhang Yan sure is ostentatious. But no matter how formidable that dragon carp is, he borrowed it from someone else and doesn't possess his own ability. Allow me to test him and see if he's as formidable as the rumors say. Just now, even though he was restrained by Huang Fuzhou, he only felt that he'd been careless for a moment, and he didn't really think that he'd lost. But he'd lost face in the end, so at this moment, he urgently wanted to get it back from Zhang Yan. Moreover, he was already within the hall now, and the dragon carp outside the door was unable to exert its might. So he felt extremely confident in his ability, so he shouted right away and cupped his hands. "Fellow Taoist Zhang, I'm Ding Wei. I've heard of your great name for a long time, and I've specially come to seek your guidance." As soon as he finished speaking, he impatiently attacked. He'd learned the lesson just now, and he'd revealed his true ability as soon as he attacked. With a whistling sound, a ferocious green flood dragon that was completely green flew out from the sword light. It shook its long and slender body and went straight for Zhang Yan. Elder who didn't expect his disciple to have so many devious thoughts. When he realized that something was wrong, it was already too late for him to stop it. His expression changed, and he said, "Disciple, you can't." Zhang Yan saw the flood dragon coming over from the corner of his eye, but his expression didn't change. He sat still, and a gust of black strong wind naturally swirled around his body. With a gentle twist, the flood dragon that was charging at him didn't even have the slightest bit of resistance. It was instantly torn into pieces, and with a cry, it turned into spots of green light and dissipated. Ding Wei was stunned for a moment before he suddenly let out a loud cry. He spat out blood and fell to the ground. This flood dragon's soul essence was refined using his heart's blood, and now that it was broken, he was severely injured. However, his eyes were filled with confusion, and he didn't know how the method he was so proud of was broken so easily. Zhang Yan said indifferently, "Where did this junior come from? Why doesn't he know the rules?" Elder whose expression was ugly. He said slowly, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, you're Yuanying Jinren. Why bother with a junior disciple?" As soon as he said that, everyone was shocked, and all eyes were focused on Zhang Yan. Yuanying Jinren. He cultivated for 100 years, but he had already achieved Yuanying. What kind of extraordinary talent was this? Although they had already guessed it, when Elder Hu really pointed it out, everyone couldn't help but be shocked. Zhang Yan looked at Elder Hu calmly and said, "Who is this fellow Taoist?" Elder Hu said in a deep voice, "I'm Hu Yunzhong from Pingde sect. The person that you injured is my disciple." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "So it's fellow Taoist Hu. Since you're an outstanding disciple, you need to discipline him well." Elder Hu exhaled, and his eyes were filled with anger. He laughed coldly and said, "Jinren Zhang, I heard that you've achieved first-grade Dan and that your cultivation technique is profound. I'd like to learn from you." He had already made up his mind. For the sake of the Yin-Yang talisman shell, he had to make a move tonight. Since he injured his disciple, he could use this as an excuse. He believed that no one would blame him afterward. As expected, as soon as he said that, the Yang talisman immediately stopped moving. He couldn't help but curse in his heart. Zhang Yan laughed heartily and said, "I also have the intention to join in this banquet. Since Elder Hu is interested, I dare not entertain you." Pingdu sect's Elder Hua and the other Elder Yu exchanged glances. Suddenly, they said, "Wait." Elder Hu felt slightly unhappy. Could it be that these two fellow disciples were going to stop him? He calmed his breathing slightly and said, "Senior brother, what advice do you have for me?" Elder Hua had a lean face and a good demeanor. He smiled and said, "Junior brother Hu, if we Yuanying cultivators were to fight, I'm afraid this hall wouldn't be able to withstand it. Since you can't display your skills, why don't you go outside and learn from each other? What do you think?" Elder Hu was stunned. Then, a hint of wild joy appeared in his eyes. He said, "That's right, senior brother. That's how it should be, how it should be." Chapter 513. P.S. Second update. Pingdu sect was different from other Xianmen. Their cultivation techniques were not outstanding. Even among the top 10 sects, they were at the bottom. However, this sect had a rare treasure that was extremely extraordinary. This treasure was called the Hidden Appearance Pagoda, and there were 365 Dharma spirits within it. Every single Dharma spirit was born with the ability to use Tao techniques after being nurtured and refined by someone. The disciples only needed to worship this item. After a long time, they would be able to sense it and invite a Dharma spirit to come down and place it in their body. They would then be nurtured by their own Yuanjin. If it was fated, they would be able to summon it in less than 10 years. Once they were recognized by these Dharma spirits, the disciples did not need to deliberately cultivate methods to defeat the enemy. As long as their cultivation realm was up to par, their combat power would increase immediately. Even their experience in fighting techniques would be extremely rich. They would not be weaker than the veterans. Other than the direct descendants, not everyone in the sect could cultivate this supernatural power. If they learned other techniques or did not have enough talent, they would not be able to cultivate this power. For example, Ding Wei, who was defeated by Zhang Yan, could not invite a Dharma spirit because he cultivated a flying sword. However, Dharma spirits were the key to success and failure. If the cultivators of the Pingdu sect wanted to improve their combat strength, they could only ask for help from a more powerful Dharma spirit. Among the 365 Dharma spirits, the 28 Dharma spirits were the most powerful. 3 primordial, 7 symbols, and 18 capital masters. 3 primordial could only be used by people from Grotto Heaven. As for the remaining 25 Dharma spirits, if one did not reach Yuanying state, one could forget about it. Elder Hua's Dharma spirit was one of the 7 symbols. Elder Hu's Dharma spirit was one level lower. He was one of the 18 capital masters. The Tao techniques and supernatural power that he knew were not as good as Elder Hua's. In the future, if Elder Hu contributed greatly to the sect, or reached Yuanying's second realm, he might have a chance to exchange for one. Other than that, every Dharma spirit that Pingdu sect cultivators nurtured. As long as the master allowed it, it could be lent to people of similar cultivation level to use it. However, this method consumed a lot of one's mana and vitality. Very few people were willing to do this. Outsiders would never know about it. Elder Hu and Elder Hua were from the same sect. How could he not understand the meaning behind the latter's words? Asking him to go out and fight was not because he was afraid of breaking the main hall, but because he wanted to borrow the magical spirit of one of the 7 symbols for his own use. How could he not be happy? Originally, he had no confidence in fighting with Zhang Yan, but now, his confidence was greatly boosted. He cupped his fists at Huxian, then looked at Zhang Yan and stomped his foot. Leaping up, he transformed into a beam of clear light and flew out of the main hall. Zhang Yan smiled, picked up the wine cup on the table, and took a sip. Then, he flung his sleeves and turned into a stream of light. In the blink of an eye, he stopped on the water continent. Under Huxian's lead, everyone left the hall together and arrived at the beach. At this time, the moon was already in the middle of the sky, its bright and clear splendor spread out on the ground, sprinkling down an expanse of silvery white. The sound of the wind was whistling in his ears, and the sound of waves beating against the shore could be heard continuously. The disciples outside had arrived. They had originally come to watch the battle between the top 10 disciples of the sect. When they saw that it was 2 people who were about to fight, they immediately clamored and their spirits were roused. Chen Xiaoling saw that the 2 of them were about to fight. Her body couldn't help but tremble. She actually didn't know what this elder whose cultivation level was. However, this was the only Yuanying cultivator she could ask to fight, so she could only hope that he could win against Zhang Yan. Elder Hu looked straight at Zhang Yan and said coldly, "Fellow Zhang, this is a battle between you and me, don't ask others to interfere, otherwise it will be unfair." How could Zhang Yan not see through his thoughts? He laughed and said, "Elder Hu, don't worry, I definitely won't ask for the dragon carp's help." Elder Hu's intentions were exposed, but he didn't blush or feel awkward at all, he only said, "That's for the best." However, he seemed to still be worried, so he bowed to Huxian and said, "Jinren Huo will be the host today, please be a witness." Huxian nodded solemnly and said, "That's right." Elder Hua, who was standing far away, turned around and whispered to Wu Hanqing who was standing behind her, "Disciple, after your uncle master who makes his move, I will be able to help him with the technique. However, I can't be disturbed at all, so you have to protect me and don't let anyone get close." Wu Hanqing said worriedly, "Master, are you really going to lend the Dharma spirit to Uncle Master? If anything were to happen, it would be detrimental to one's cultivation." Elder Hua smiled and said, "Why would I do a losing deal? There will be benefits for you, I will know about it in a few days." Wu Hanqing's heart skipped a beat. He recalled that just now, Zhong Muqing and Elder Hua seemed to be discussing something, and it was obvious that they had reached some kind of deal. He was delighted. He came to Qinsang school to ask for Jinren Qin's help so that he could break through the Yuanying state. However, Jinren Qin refused to see him, so he could only wait patiently. There was still no news of him until now, but with Zhong Muqing's help, the hope would increase greatly. If there was any benefit, it could only be this. Thinking about this, his heart was burning, and he could not wait for Elder Hu to defeat Zhang Yan immediately. Zhong Muqing originally thought that his participation in the sword competition was a foregone conclusion, but Zhang Yan came riding on the dragon carp, which made him feel that there might be a change in the matter, and he felt that it was a little unreliable. Elder Hua saw this, and just now, he took the opportunity and hinted that he could share his burden. If Zhang Yan was defeated by the Pingde sect in the battle of techniques, then the matter would definitely not work out. Elder Hua took a deep breath, and his body trembled slightly. He closed his eyes and activated his technique. After a short while, spots of golden light appeared above his head, and then gathered in mid-air to form a golden-armored deity with a cold expression, and there was no emotion in his eyes. This Dharma spirit was not formed by mana, but by a mysterious consciousness. Other than the followers of the Pingde sect, no one else could see it. Elder Hu naturally saw it clearly, seeing that the Dharma spirit was floating towards him. He did not hesitate and first hid his own Dharma spirit into a talisman. After keeping it into his acupuncture point, he then made a gesture, and with a whoosh, the Dharma spirit poured in from the top, and then merged into his spirit. In an instant, there were countless things in his sea of consciousness, and he felt that the supernatural powers and techniques that he could not control previously were all at his fingertips. At the same time, Elder Hua's face turned pale, and he almost lost his footing. He knew that he had exhausted too much of his qi of vitality, and he would need to cultivate for another 3 to 4 years to recover. However, as long as his disciple had the chance to achieve Yuanying, everything would be worth it. Zhang Yan suddenly felt that Elder Hu's aura in front of him was weak, and then strong, as if he had changed into another person in an instant. He felt strange. He knew a little about the Pingde sect's techniques, and he also understood that the level of their combat power depended on the Dharma spirit. However, for thousands of years, the supernatural powers and techniques of the Pingde sect did not remain the same. Otherwise, people would have seen through them, and they would not have a foothold. If it was a battle of life and death, Zhang Yan would not care what kind of technique was used, and he would have launched a fierce attack to suppress the other party until they could not use their techniques. However, since it was a battle, it was inconvenient for him to be so aggressive, and it was good to see the other party's techniques. He calmly took out the star's sword pellet, and it hung above his head. However, at this moment, there was a wonderful feeling in his mind. It was as if the person standing in front of him was not his real enemy, but the real threat came from behind him. The feeling was mysterious, and it did not make sense, but it felt very real. Zhang Yan's thoughts turned quickly. Ever since he sacrificed himself, his sword consciousness was already connected to the spirit, and it was clear and flawless. Even if he was in some secret technique or illusion, he would not make such a mistake, so there must be a problem. He muttered to himself, but he did not turn his head to look behind him. Instead, he took out the star's sword pellet, and with the help of the sword eye, he scanned through everyone behind him. However, when he scanned through Elder Hua, the star's sword pellet buzzed and trembled slightly. His gaze immediately flickered. Elder Hu seemed to have taken a long time to collect the Dharma spirit, but in actual fact, it only took a moment. He shouted and took out a crystal-clear blue sand from his sleeve. He wiped it with his hand, and it turned into a dazzling blue ray. In a breath's time, it expanded to a length of 10,000 feet. It was like a rainbow, and it was magnificent. Hu Xian and the rest frowned when they saw him taking out the item. Elder Yu from Pingde cult smiled and pointed at it. He said to the disciples behind him, "Your uncle master who used this method, and he is very cautious. With this, he is in an invincible position for now." Elder Hu leaped into the sky, and with a clench of his hand, it was as if he could summon the wind and rain, and suddenly, thunder rumbled. At the same time, countless yellow clouds separated to the left and right, and fell down to cover the ground. This seemed to be a technique that sealed heaven and earth, but the range was only 1,000 feet, and it was much weaker than what the dragon carp had displayed the other day. If Zhang Yan used the sword escape at that moment, he could dash out. However, at that moment, he suddenly decided to follow his heart. He stood still on the spot, and with a clear shout, he raised his hand and pointed. The star's sword pill instantly turned into 16 shining sword gleams, and 15 of them vibrated rapidly. In an instant, they tore through the clouds and slashed towards Elder who was in midair. One of them turned around and turned into a ray of light that flew towards Elder Hua. At the same time, Zhang Yan shouted, "Since Elder Hua has the intention, why are you hiding at the back sneakily? Please come out and fight." Elder Hua was instantly shocked. He did not expect Zhang Yan to suddenly attack him, and he did not know how he revealed his weakness. Seeing that the flying sword was coming at him aggressively, as if it was going to behead him in one go, he felt guilty and could not care about Elder Hu anymore. He hurriedly made a gesture and called the Dharma spirit back, and raised a protective light to defend himself. The Dharma spirit was nurtured by him, and he could summon it with just a thought. However, Elder Hu was caught off guard. He was initially showing his prowess and freely channeling the Taoist techniques of his sect, but suddenly, the Dharma spirit disappeared from his body. At that moment, it was as if his spine was pulled out. His body stiffened, and the protective blue light around him disappeared completely. As a result, when the 15 sword pills came for him, they pierced through his body without any hindrance. Elder Hu's eyes were wide open, and he seemed to be in disbelief. His expression was indescribably sorrowful, and he said with a trembling voice, "Senior, you." Before he could finish his sentence, he fell to the ground. Chapter 5:14. P.S. Part 3. What happened was as fast as lightning. Within a breath's time, Elder Hu was heavily injured by Zhang Yan. It was too late for anyone to stop him. Elder Yu was shocked. Luckily, he reacted fast enough and caught Elder Hu with a ray of light so that he wouldn't fall to his death. Even so, Elder Hu was in a pitiful state. His body was pierced by 15 sword energies and he was covered in blood. Even if he was still breathing, there was no way for him to recover. He could only be sent to be reincarnated. Madame Chen was still calm. After a few glances, she knew that this person couldn't be saved. She yelled at the servant girl beside her, "What are you standing there for? Hurry up and bring me a spiritual pill." Today's Huan River banquet was a competition of skills. Therefore, many spiritual pills and medicines were prepared. The servant girl didn't dare to delay. She rushed to Elder Hu's side and took out a jade bottle. Just as she was about to hand it over, Elder Yu pushed it away and said with a cold expression, "I don't dare to use something from your Qinsang school." The maidservant was a descendant of the Chen clan and had high standards. Even though she had to obey Madame Chen's wishes, she was not afraid of the elders of other sections. She snorted and said, "Spiritual Master Yu, the two of them were having a fair fight just now. Why are you getting angry at a servant? This is Jinren Yu's order, not mine. The pill is here. It's up to you whether you want to use it or not." With that, she threw the porcelain bottle on the ground and turned around to leave. Elder Yu was stunned. He didn't expect a servant girl to have such a bad temper. He was speechless after being talked back to. His face turned red and he wanted to explode, but he was afraid of losing his status. He turned around and said hatefully, "Jinren Zhang, it was just a friendly fight. Why did you have to be so heavy-handed?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Elder Yu, you can ask Elder Hua. I believe he knows the reason." Elder Yu harumphed. He glared at Elder Hua and didn't say anything else. He took out a pill and tried to make Elder Hu swallow it. This pill could sustain a single breath of vitality. It could protect the primordial spirit from dispersing and the body from being damaged for 3 days. However, it was impossible for him to return to the sect. He could only find a place nearby and escort him to reincarnate. Whether or not he could cultivate in his next life would depend on his own luck. Elder Hua's face alternated between red and white. He had already come back to his senses. Just now, when Zhang Yan slashed at him with his sword, it was actually just a test. It was impossible for him to really kill him. If he had not panicked at that time, he would have been able to defend without moving. Elder Hu would not be defeated so easily by Zhang Yan. This junior brother of his was indirectly killed by him. However, it was too late to regret now. He also had nowhere to vent his anger. He turned around to look at his disciple and scolded, "You idiot, I clearly told you to guard well. Why are you so useless at this critical moment? What do I need you for?" Wu Hanqing also felt wronged. What happened just now was like a flash of lightning. Taking a step back, even if he could make a move in time, how could he block spiritual master Yuanying's thunderous strike? Wasn't he just seeking his own death? Zhang Yan's sword just now could be said to be a stroke of genius. Originally, with Elder Hu's cultivation, he would not be so weak if he fought him head-on. Even his protective treasure light would not be so easily broken. However, when the Dharma spirit came and went, it caused a huge difference in Elder Hu's strength before and after. This caused Elder Hu to fall behind greatly, which was why he was easily taken down by Zhang Yan. It could be seen that when cultivators fought, it was not just about the magical treasures and supernatural powers of both sides. It was more about the grasp of opportunities. No matter how good one's cultivation technique was, without the tempering of cruel life and death battles, the slightest carelessness would result in death. Hu Xian's gaze was cold. He stood there silently. His knowledge and insight were not something an ordinary person could compare to. How could he not see that Elder Hu and Elder Hua had done something secretly just now? If it was not for Zhang Yan discovering something fishy and intervening, they would probably have to go through a tough fight. Both sides had already agreed not to rely on external forces. However, Elder Hu had broken the rule in front of him. Even if he was killed on the spot, it could not be blamed on Qinsang School. However, Zhang Yan had indeed used too much force. He could see that with Zhang Yan's cultivation of a flying sword that could move at will, he could have stopped in time. Although it was not wrong, if Pingda's sect did not let it go, it would be very troublesome. Based on his understanding of Zhang Yan, he could vaguely feel that this junior brother of his was not doing this just for a moment of pleasure. He thought to himself, "Junior brother Zhang, what exactly are you planning?" The thousands of Qinsang School disciples who were watching the battle were even more disappointed. They were looking forward to a good fight, but the outcome was decided in the blink of an eye. Elder Hu's defeat was even more inexplicable. It was as if he had taken the initiative to go up and die. It was extremely boring to watch, and they even looked down on Pingda's sect. Qin Xiaoling's lips trembled as she looked at Elder Hu, who was lying on the ground. This person, whom she had pinned all her hopes on, had been killed by Zhang Yan. He could not resist at all. How did she find such a useless person? If it was not for the fact that she had to wait for the time to withdraw the Yang talisman, she would not want to stay here any longer. After Elder Yu helped Elder Hu take the pill, he stood up and said to Zhang Yan coldly, "Jinren Zhang, no matter what, my Pingda's sect's elder was injured by your hands. You must give us an explanation for this." Hu Xian was displeased. "Elder Yu, why do you have to do this? It is inevitable that there will be injuries in a fight. This is not a fight based on personal feelings. Don't hurt the harmony between our sections." Elder Yu was agitated and said angrily, "Jinren Hua, it is easy for you to say that. One of my sect's elders has died. Are you going to let it go just like that?" Hu Xian glanced at him and asked coldly, "What do you plan to do, Elder Yu?" Elder Yu hesitated for a moment and said in a low voice, "I am willing to fight another round with Jinren Zhang. Regardless of life or death, if I lose, I will have no more complaints." Hu Xian shook his head. This Elder Yu did not leave the sect often. Just now, he would say such ridiculous words. Luo Qingyu smiled and took the initiative to step forward, saying, "Elder Yu, junior brother Zhang has already fought a battle just now, why don't I accompany him?" Elder Yu looked at Luo Qingyu and could not help but take a step back. The latter had been famous for a long time and Elder Yu had seen his techniques and supernatural powers. He knew that he had no chance of winning. Although he shouted loudly earlier, he did not have much confidence in the face of the disciples of Qinsang School. He knew that he would not be able to gain any advantage here. He scoffed and stomped his feet. This is not the end of this. I will ask the Jinren sect leader to come forward and reason with all of you. He did not call out to Elder Hua. He carried Elder Hu's body and flew away in the blink of an eye. Madame Qin saw that things were about to get out of hand. She walked up to Huxian and said softly, "Master, do you need me to?" Huxian waved his hand and interrupted her. "There is no need for that. Everyone has their own opinions. How can he turn the tables with just a few words?" He looked at Zhang Yan and sighed. "Junior brother Zhang, come with me. I have something to say to you." He leaped up and flew into the sky. Zhang Yan pondered for a while and smiled. He rode on a gust of strong wind and followed after Huxian. At this moment, in the basilica, Zhongmu looked calm and was drinking alone. He had already returned to this place when Elder Hu was defeated and everything was in chaos. Not long after, footsteps were heard and a beautiful female disciple rushed to his side. Zhongmu put down his wine cup. His eyes were clear and he asked, "How was it?" The female disciple was a little hesitant. She lowered her head and said, "Uncle Master, Feng has disappointed you." Although the apprentices of Xianshui Palace are very nice to Feng, they are very tight-lipped when it comes to matters of the palace. I could not find out anything. Zhong Muqing pondered for a while and suddenly smiled. "I know. You did well. I can already tell that junior brother Zhang's dragon carp is not the one in senior brother Qi's palace." The female disciple raised her head in confusion. "How did Uncle Master know?" Zhong Muqing said casually, "Since the dragon carp was lent to junior brother Zhang openly, why can't he say it? He's being secretive because he doesn't know the situation and doesn't know how to say it, so he can only say it vaguely." The female disciple opened her eyes wide and thought about it carefully. It was indeed so. Zhong Muqing was able to see through the clues from just a few clues. She could not help but admire him. Zhong Muqing smiled at her and took out a jade scroll. He passed it to her and said, "Junior niece, you can go first. I will call you if there is anything." The female disciple looked at the jade scroll happily and bowed. Then, she rode on a ray of light and left the basilica. After he found out that the dragon carp wasn't given to him by Qi Yuntian, Zhong Muqing's mood unconsciously lightened up greatly, and at the same time, he praised in his heart. "Junior brother Zhang, you've utilized the power of others extremely well, and you've almost deceived me as well. But even if your scheme succeeds, you'll only be able to win a momentary opportunity, and you won't be able to change the overall situation." He stood up but did not use any escape technique. He just casually walked out of the hall. Seeing that Elder Hua still did not leave, his eyes flashed and he walked to his side. He cupped his hands and said, "Elder Hua, greetings." Elder Hua also wanted to leave, but he still had something to ask of Qinsang School, so he could not just leave like this. Seeing that it was Zhong Muqing, he sighed and smiled bitterly. "Fellow Taoist Zhong, why are you still looking for me?" Zhong Muqing smiled and said, "Elder Hua, could it be that you don't want me to help you with your disciples' matter?" Elder Hua was stunned. He thought that this matter would definitely not work out. He did not expect there to be a turn of events. However, he immediately put on a vigilant expression and asked, "Fellow Taoist Zhong, what are your conditions?" Zhong Muqing walked over and whispered a few words in his ear. Elder Hua hesitated and said, "This is a disgraceful move." Zhong Muqing smiled and said, "Elder Hua, why are you being so unreasonable? Even if I didn't mention this, would your Pingdu sect just let it go?" Elder Hua chuckled and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhong, I hope you won't go back on your words." Zhong Muqing looked at the bright moon in the sky and sighed. He thought to himself, "Junior brother Zhang, even if your strength is extraordinary and you're indeed qualified to participate in the dueling spell gathering, some things aren't so simple. You've made the wrong move this time. If you could endure it and make trouble during the grand competition next year, I'm afraid I would have a headache for a period of time. But now, you no longer have the chance." Chapter 5:15. P.S. There are 2 more updates on the 3rd. A month later, in the glittering grotto heaven, Perfected Qin was wearing a purple moon jade robe. She held half a green bamboo in her hand as she sat on the green lotus throne. Zhong Muqing was standing respectfully by the side of the pool in front of her. At that moment, there was a hint of joy in the depths of his eyes. He had already received a flying sword message. Due to the killing of Pingdu's sex elder Hu, a grotto heaven with the surname Zhao personally went to Qinsang school to meet sect master Qin Mabai. No one knew what the two of them talked about, but an hour later, a decree was issued from the floating celestial palace, ordering Zhang Yan to stay in seclusion for 5 years and not to hear about anything in the sect. A trifling 5 years wasn't much to a cultivator, but the crux of the matter lay in the 8 words, none of the matters of the sect are to be heard of. The next year would be the sect's competition. This meant that Zhang Yan had missed the last chance to turn the situation around and could no longer attend the sword competition assembly. Zhong Muqing was rather pleased. Perfected One, if junior brother Zhang had held back this time and exerted his strength during the competition, with sect master Perfected Qin's support, he might have been able to achieve this. It's just that he was too anxious. Perfected Qin nodded slightly. Although the Huan River night banquet ended on bad terms, Zhang Yan had killed Elder Hu of Pingdu's sect with a single strike. Once the news of this matter spread, the disciples of the sect were shocked. Zhang Yan's first-grade corps was already extremely famous in Qinsang school. However, in less than 100 years of cultivation, he had already entered the Yuanying state. Everyone knew what it meant to be talented. After this battle, his reputation was even more famous. No one among the top 10 disciples in the sect could compare to him. If he used this momentum to fight with Zhong Muqing during the competition, with the sect master's help, there was a possibility that he could disrupt her plans. However, seeing how happy Zhong Muqing was, Perfected One Qin frowned. He stared at him and said, "Muqing, do you think that your sect is not Zhang Yan's match?" Zhong Muqing was stunned. Perfected One, I am naturally not afraid. Perfected One Qin's phoenix eyes were filled with authority. He shouted, "Then why are you so happy?" Zhong Muqing was shocked, and his back was drenched in cold sweat. He stood still for a long time before he exhaled and bowed. "Thank you, Taoist, for helping me resolve this inner demon." He had heard many rumors about Zhang Yan defeating powerful enemies outside. Even if he didn't believe all of them, he had unconsciously regarded him as a worthy opponent. Therefore, in the depths of his heart, he was already trying his best to avoid a direct confrontation with him. This was actually deviating from the correct path, and he was afraid before the battle even started. Immortal Qin's expression softened as she raised her slender hand. He pointed at his heart and said, "The battle on the path of Tao has always been about everyone using their own methods. You used the peaceful capital sect to get rid of your opponent in one fell swoop, you did well. But you need to understand that as cultivators, only our own cultivation is the foundation. Everything else is fabricated. In my Qinsang school, if you can defeat Zhang Yan fair and square, even if he has 1,000 schemes, what do you have to fear?" Zhong Muqing said shamefully, "Yes, you are right. I know I was wrong." Immortal Qin nodded and said, "It's good that you understand. You can go now. Go back to the cave and cultivate in peace. Don't let me down in this sword fight." Zhong Muqing bowed deeply and said, "Yes, I will take my leave." Dim light turned into a cave. Immortal Yan looked at the letter in his hand, but he smiled and said, "This Zhang Yan is really good at scheming. This is just a move to advance in order to retreat." Luo Qingyu, who was standing below, revealed a puzzled expression. Immortal Yan said with a smile, "Disciple, Zhang Yan has reached the nascent soul stage after leaving the sect for more than 30 years. This must be the arrangement of the headmaster. Although I don't know what he did, the price must be high. Since he spent so much effort on this chess piece, how can he abandon it? How can he not use it? If I am not wrong, this Zhang Yan is most likely used by the headmaster to deal with senior fellow apprentice Zhong so that he can suppress Immortal Qin." Luo Qingyu pondered for a moment and said with some uncertainty, Master, you mean that junior fellow apprentice Zhang saw that the sect had already decided the candidates for the sword fight and felt that it was difficult to win, so he wanted to withdraw. However, he was afraid that the headmaster would not allow it, so he deliberately made this move so that he wouldn't have to compete with the three of us? Immortal Yan nodded and said with a smile, yes. Hearing Immortal Yan's words, Luo Qingyu thought carefully and also thought that it was the truth. He couldn't help sighing. Since junior fellow apprentice Zhang entered the sect, he has been courageous and diligent and has never retreated. I didn't expect that he would shrink back because of this matter. Immortal Yan waved the horsetail whisk in his hand and said with a faint smile, it's not strange. If it weren't for Immortal Peng's help, how could Zhang Yan be one of the top 10 disciples? Now that Immortal Peng has his own disciple, why would he care about him? Zhang Yan withdrew at this moment to protect himself. It can be seen that he is not a fool. Luo Qingyu nodded silently. He could also understand Zhang Yan's action. There was a bottomless abyss in front of him. If he was not careful, he might fall into pieces. If it were him, he would not have such courage. Instead, he admired Zhang Yan for coming up with such a way to get out of the predicament. Immortal Yan stroked his beard and said, Qingyu, my disciple, your formation map will be more powerful after I refine it for you. In this sword fight between the 16 sects, you must get a copy of that thing. This is the key to your attainment of Taoism in the future, so you must not take it lightly. Luo Qingyu raised his hands and bowed, saying solemnly, Master, I will keep your words in mind. At this moment, there was a dilapidated Taoist temple in Ban Mountain, which was tens of thousands of miles away from Qinsang School. From the outside, it looked normal. But no one knew that there was a subaltar of the Hunqing sect in the depth of the mountain. The disciples here were responsible for inquiring about the news of the big Xianmen sects, even the trivial things were not missed. At this time, the altar master, Yu Jigao, suddenly received a letter. After reading it, his face was full of joy. He stood up and paced back and forth. Then he took out a stack of files from his sleeve. After thinking for a while, he picked up a pen and wrote a line of words on it. With the sound of footsteps, his junior brother, He Lianwei, stepped into the inner room. Seeing that Yu Jigao was in high spirits, He Lianwei could not help but tease him, Senior brother, did something good happen? Don't lose your little brother. Yu Jigao laughed and handed over the letter, saying, it is indeed good. Junior brother, take a look. He Lianwei suddenly became interested. He took the letter, glanced at it, and asked in surprise, what's so special about this Zhang Yan? Yu Jigao handed over the file in his hand and said, Junior brother, you haven't been here for a long time, so you don't know this person's background. After reading it, you will know how powerful this person is. Oh. He Lianwei took it suspiciously and opened it to read. Not long after, the corner of his eyes twitched, and his eyes widened. The more he read, the more moved he became. How could this person be described as powerful? Cultivating for less than 30 years, he had already condensed a first-grade golden core. Entering the Tao for 100 years, he had already stepped into the Yuanying realm. He was also skilled in the art of killing with flying swords. Even in the 6 great demonic sects, how many people could compare to this kind of extraordinary talent? However, this was not the most shocking thing. Continuing to read, it was all of Zhang Yan's achievements when he was traveling outside. Especially when he saw what he did after achieving the Yuanying realm, He Lianwei was amazed and said repeatedly, this person is so amazing, so amazing. When Zhang Yan was traveling in the Middle Pillar Divine Province, he consecutively killed 9 Yuanying true masters of Lai Xian sect. The Battle of Double Moon Peak was even more shocking. Under the joint attack of 7 Yuanying true masters, not only did he not lose, he even killed the 7 of them one by one. On the Eastern Sea, he annihilated the entire Lu family of Reef Prefecture, and more than 300,000 demon soldiers were wiped out in one battle. The Dharma body of the elder of Chongyue True Temple, Yuanying Shenlin II, was killed, and then he subdued the 1,000-year-old dragon carp and captured it to be his mount. When He Lianwei saw this, his temples were already sweating. One had to know that the latter two had profound cultivation and had already cultivated to the third layer of Yuanying realm, yet they still lost to this person. It could be imagined how powerful this Zhang Yan's battle prowess was. Yu Jiegao looked at his expression and said with a smile, recently, this Zhang Yan even killed a Yuanying elder of Pingdu sect with one sword. What do you think, junior brother he? Helian Wei let out a long breath. He put down the scroll and shook his head. He sat down and pondered for a while before saying with absolute certainty, this must be because that Zhang Yan's flying sword art has become increasingly perfected after a few battles, causing his battle prowess to rise to another level. Otherwise, it wouldn't be enough to explain this matter. Yu Jiegao nodded in agreement and said, that's right, this brother also thinks so. In their hearts, Zhang Yan's true battle prowess had already risen to a level that was even more terrifying than Hua, Zhong, and Luo. Even though he was only a first-layer Yuanying cultivator, he definitely didn't dare to look down on him. He Lianwei flipped through the scroll again and suddenly asked, Senior brother, why is it not written what kind of Dao technique this person cultivates? He Lianwei shook his head and said, this person's Dao technique is incomparably strange and has never been seen before. My sect's disciples have investigated several times, but they still can't find out anything. He Lianwei sighed and said, Qinsang School is indeed worthy of being called the mystical gate. If this person comes to the sword competition assembly of the 16 sects, he will definitely be a formidable opponent for our generation. Speaking of which, even though the demonic sect had taken advantage of the situation to rise in recent years due to the demonic calamity, compared to the 10 sects that occupied most of the spiritual lands in Donghua continent, their foundation was still lacking. But after a few hundred years, it would be hard to say. Yu Jiegao laughed loudly and said, since this person can't go to the sword competition assembly, I think the uncle masters can rest assured. He Lianwei looked at the letter and shook his head. This person is so powerful, I wonder why Qinsang School destroyed itself. Yu Jiegao smiled playfully and said, this Zhang Yan isn't from a big clan, and his master isn't from the 10 Grotto Heaven's spiritual masters of Qinsang School. Junior brother, do you understand? He Lianwei came to a realization and said, so that's how it is. No wonder. The sword competition assembly this time involved the fight for that item, so no one could easily give it up. Of course, only the direct descendants could go. Not to mention the mystical gate, it was the same for the demonic sect. Yu Jiegao then said seriously, Junior brother, this matter is already a foregone conclusion, but we can't let our guard down. If something goes wrong, our lives will be in danger. We need to order people to keep a close eye on it, lest something unexpected happens. Thinking of the tricks in the sect, He Lianwei shuddered. He didn't dare to be careless, so he stood up and said, I understand. Just as everyone inside and outside of Qinsang School was discussing Zhang Yan's matter, he was standing in front of the floating heavenly palace of Qinsang School with his hands behind his back. He looked at the astral winds and clouds floating around, his expression calm and composed, without a hint of worry. After a while, a Daoist child walked out and bowed deeply in front of him. He said, Uncle Master Zhang, the sect master has summoned you to the hall. Chapter 5:16. Zhang Yan followed the boy into the hall. He saw the sect leader sitting on the jade platform. Behind him the black water was surging. There was a loud rumbling sound. He did not dare to be rude. Immediately he bowed and said, Disciple Zhang Yan, specially come to return the Yingjia fish drum. He flicked his sleeves and the treasure flew out. It turned into a green light and flew out. Sect leader Qin swept it up from the heavenly river and the item disappeared without a trace. Sect leader Qin had a gentle expression and said, Zhang Yan, you have been away for 30 years and you have already stepped into the Yuanying realm. You have not disappointed me. Zhang Yan bowed slightly and said, Sect leader, please tell me what my next step should be. Sect leader Qin smiled and said, Oh. You have already guessed it. A bright light flashed in Zhang Yan's eyes and he said, Everything sect leader does has a deep meaning. I am just guessing in my heart. From sect leader Qin's actions, he could tell that this person was really farsighted and wouldn't do things for no reason. He used the Yingjia fish drum as an example. He had only used it once, and just by looking at how weak his true spirit was, he knew that his essence energy had been damaged. Before this, only Qi Yuntian had used it before. Why would he pay such a price just to help him enter the nascent soul stage? There had to be another reason. In the recent decades, the sect leader had arranged everything, and most of the tour guide's efforts were on him. How would he let him be useless at such a crucial moment? Although Zhang Yan couldn't see what the sect leader would do, as long as he knew this, he wouldn't have to worry about not being able to unsheath his sharp sword. The battle with Elder Hu was just to prove his strength. As for heavily injuring him, he didn't care at all. If the sect leader wasn't willing to support him, then even if he could beat Hua, Zhong, and Luo in the competition next year, it would be useless. On the contrary, these were just small matters and there was no need to worry about them. Not long ago, the decree that was sent out from the floating heaven palace confirmed his guesses. 5 years of seclusion was actually a hint. 5 years later, it would be the grand competition of the 16 sects. If one truly wanted to cut off his path to the grand competition, then he could be punished with 10 years, 20 years, or even 30 years. However, Shi Ri's prediction was so accurate that he could confirm that his previous judgment was correct. And all of this, the sect leader had never said it out loud, it was all up to him. Sect leader Qin cast his gaze over and sighed. I know what you're thinking. However, if you were to go to the Dharma assembly, you would have to cast aside your identity as a member of the Qinsang school. I would have nothing to offer you, and you would not be taken care of by your peers. At that time, be it the Xian men or the devil sects, they would all be your enemies. Even so, do you still dare to go? Zhang Yan's gaze was resolute as he smiled and said, even if I am surrounded by enemies, I dare to face them with my sword. A bright light appeared in sect leader Qin's eyes. He looked at him for a moment, then raised his voice and shouted, Zhang Yan. From today onwards, that disciple of yours, Wei Zihong, will be the sect leader of the Yaoyin sect. You will be the grand supreme elder of the Yaoyin sect. You will lead the sect to the sword competition assembly. Zhang Yan's body trembled slightly. When these words were spoken, it was as if the clouds had parted to reveal the sun. His mind was suddenly enlightened, and he understood everything. So all the schemes from before were for this purpose. The sect leader did not intend to break through the predicament for him from within the sect, but to start from scratch. In just an instant, these thoughts flashed through Zhang Yan's mind. He calmed himself down, stepped forward, and bowed. He said loudly, yes, sect leader. Sect leader Qin said, if you have any doubts, feel free to ask. Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, sect leader, can the Yaoyin sect also fight for that item? Will it not be tolerated by the other sects? Sect leader Qin smiled and shook his head. Even if the other sects are lucky enough to obtain that item, they will still be hunted down by the 10 sects of Xianmen. However, the Yaoyin sect is not included in this list. Back when Yi Jiuyang was in charge of this sect, he signed a spell book with the heads of the other sects, agreeing to have a sword competition and discuss the ownership of that item. However, ever since he went into seclusion, he did not show up even once. As time passed, the sects have forgotten about it. However, the 10,000 years have not passed, and the name of this sect is still on that spell book, and has not disappeared. Even if the Yaoyin sect still has one disciple, the sects will still have to acknowledge it. Therefore, this time, it can be considered to be justifiable. Zhang Yan suddenly understood. No wonder the sect leader wanted to obtain the inheritance of the Yaoyin sect and wanted him to take Wei Zihong as his disciple. So he had already made arrangements for this. He thought about it carefully, and secretly praised sect leader Qin's method could be said to be brilliant. He and Hua Xian entered one in the open and one in the dark. Both sides attacked at the same time, and even before the sword competition, they had already gained an advantage. Moreover, according to common sense, a sect like the Yaoyin sect that had not appeared in the world for thousands of years, even if they went to the sword competition, they would at most send one disciple. Perhaps it would cause some surprise, but it would not cause the disciples of the other sects to feel fear. In the sword competition between the 16 sects, the sects had always decided the number of disciples who would enter the next competition based on the result of the sword competition. The top number would be 3, and the bottom number would be 1. If Zhang Yan did not have the support of the sect leader, if he wanted to go to the sword competition, he would have to think of a way to squeeze out one disciple. As the 6 great demon sects had been suppressed by the Xian men for thousands of years, they had lost every time. Therefore, this time, they could only send 1 disciple. As for the other Xian men sects, they could send at least 2 disciples. They definitely would not put a weak sect like the Yaoyin sect, which had suddenly appeared, in their eyes. Sect leader Qin said unhurriedly, "Zhang Yan, going to the spell competition this time will depend on your own ability. Whatever you get, it is up to you. There is no need to ask me." Zhang Yan's heart moved. Ever since Zhou Changju returned, he also knew that the item was related to the fate of the Xian men. Whichever sect obtained it would be able to strengthen the sect. Even if it was the first place in the competition, it would be impossible for one sect to swallow it. This time, because it also involved the battle between the Xian men and the demon sects, the 10 great Xian men sect leaders had already agreed on how to divide the item. Since the sect leader had given such an order, it seemed that he was not willing to be bound by this, so he used him as a hidden chess piece. However, with this promise, didn't it mean that as long as he snatched the item back, he could take it all for himself? He shook his head slightly. Right now, it was too early to think about this. He only said, "This disciple understands." Sect leader Qin raised his hand and sent over a talisman. He said, "After you leave the palace, there is no hurry to return to the residence. Take this talisman and make a trip to the Fangchen courtyard." Zhang Yan did not ask for the reason. He extended his hand and received it. Seeing that there was no longer any sound from the jade platform, he knew that it was time for him to leave. He bowed deeply, turned around, and walked out. The children on both sides bowed to him. After Zhang Yan left the floating sky palace, he looked back. From the moment he walked out of this place, he could be considered to be completely on the side of the sect leader. There was no other way for him to go. He smiled slightly. But this was also good. Being valued by the sect leader was better than relying on the heavenly paradise true form to enter the sect. With a clear whistle, he did not use a talisman. Just like that, he broke through the astral wind, turned into a rainbow, and left the floating sky palace. He shot out a sword light, breaking the wind and splitting the air. Looking east, he arrived in the sky above the Fangchen courtyard in a moment. In front of him, there were 2 floating peaks facing each other in the sky. They were connected by chains. There were strange rocks, waterfalls, and celestial cranes flying in the sky. There were restrictions on the outside. This courtyard was one of the 9 courtyards of the Qinsang school. The formation in the school and the restrictions on the islands were all set up by the cultivators of this courtyard. Originally, this place was controlled by the aristocratic families. When he left the mountain last time, he heard that the aristocratic families had taken it back. Zhang Yan did not know why sect leader Qin had sent him here. But since it was a deliberate arrangement, there must be a deeper meaning behind it. He rode on the sword for a few more miles. Suddenly, the scenery in front of him changed. The wind blew in the sky, and countless yellow talisman appeared in front of him. A cloud ladder led straight to the middle of the 2 mountains. On the cloud ladder, there was a Taoist wearing a yellow robe with dashing eyes and sharp eyebrows sitting there. He seemed to be meditating with his eyes closed. As if he sensed someone approaching, the Taoist suddenly opened his eyes and looked over. He shouted, "Who is here? Stop quickly. If you go any further, you will reach the forbidden area of the Fangchen courtyard. Without the permission of the sect leader, you are not allowed to enter." As he spoke, he moved his hand, and the yellow talismans trembled together, making a thunderous sound. Zhang Yan stopped the sword light and stopped moving. He looked at the Taoist. The young Taoist's cultivation base was at the 3rd stage of the core transformation realm, but he had never seen him before. This was not surprising. There were many disciples in the Qinsang school, and his cave abode was outside the mountain. Other than a few elders, he did not know many people. He said, I am Zhang Yan. I am here on the orders of the sect leader. The young Taoist was shocked. He quickly put away his arrogant aura and said cautiously, so Xinjin Zhang is here. He waved his sleeve, and the yellow talismans in the sky disappeared in an instant. He leaped over and looked at Zhang Yan from head to toe. He said politely, do you have a talisman token, Xinjin? Ever since he killed Elder Hu with one sword strike, Zhang Yan's reputation in the sect had spread far and wide. No one dared to look down on him. Moreover, this Taoist was not as good as Zhang Yan in terms of cultivation base and status. Zhang Yan took out the talisman and handed it over. The Taoist did not relax because of his status. He took a few steps back and looked at it seriously before handing it back respectfully. He stepped aside to make way for the cloud ladder and said apologetically, sorry for the offense. Xinjin, please go ahead. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, may I know how to address you, Taoist? The Taoist smiled and returned the greeting. He said, I dare not. I am Yu Chongyang, a deacon of the Fangchen courtyard. Zhang Yan looked at him in surprise. He nodded and said, it's an honor to meet you. Yu Chongyang and Huang Fuzhou were once known as Qinsang's twin talents. Both of them were disciples of the same master and disciple. However, like Zhang Yan, they were not disciples of the Grotto Heaven Xinjin. Huang Fuzhou had always wanted to become one of the top 10 disciples and was well known by the disciples in the sect. However, he had been cultivating in the sect for many years and did not show himself. It was very difficult to find him. Zhang Yan had heard that he had once chosen a master for a divine item. His skills were extraordinary, and now it seemed that he was indeed extraordinary. After Zhang Yan bid farewell to the Taoist, he used his escape technique and crossed the cloud ladder. He saw a Taoist temple in the mountain and went there. He landed on the empty space in front of the temple, startling two red-crowned cranes. They flapped their wings and flew to the temple. In front of the temple, a Taoist boy was leaning against a bronze pillar that was as thick as his waist. He was snoring softly. At first, he did not notice the arrival of someone. It was only when the crane cried a few times that he woke up drowsily. Suddenly seeing Zhang Yan standing in front of him, he was startled and cried out in alarm. He subconsciously pulled on the rope beside him. In the valley, the bell rang loudly. One by one, the bronze pillars were pulled up from the ground. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.